Il Presidente. Questo è questo?
Sì. Faccio sì.
Allora. Care colleghe.
Dear colleagues, good morning.
Saluto.
I should like to welcome the President of the Council and the President of the Commission that are here in the hemicycle. Following the conclusions of the extraordinary European Council meeting of the 17th to the 21st of July 2020, I decided in agreement with the Conference of Presidents and in accordance with Rule 154 of the Rules of Procedure to convene an extraordinary sitting today from 9:30 a.m. in order for the Parliament to debate and voice its position on the recovery plan and the multi-annual financial framework for 2021-2027. With today's extraordinary sitting, the session adjourned on 10 July 2020 is therefore resumed. You have received the planning of the debate and of the voting sessions by email. Are there any comments? If there are no comments, the agenda is therefore deemed adopted and it will be published on the plenary website. The order of business is thus established. The minutes and the texts adopted of the sittings of 8, 9, 10 July 2020 are available. Are there any comments? If there are no comments, then the minutes are deemed approved. There are a few announcements. The competent authorities of Germany have communicated the election of Ms. Manuela Ripa to the European Parliament in place of Mr. Klaus Buchner, effective 16 July 2020. Following a ruling of the European Court of Justice of 19 December 2019 and in light of the decision of the Junta Electoral Central of 3 January 2020 and the decision of the Tribunal Supremo of 9 January 2020, the Parliament takes note of the election of Mr. Jordi Soler y Ferrando as an MEP with effect of 3 January 2020 in place of Mr. Oriol Junqueras y Vies. His seat was declared vacant effective 3 January 2020. I should like to welcome these colleagues and remind them that they shall take their seat in Parliament and on its bodies and shall enjoy all the rights attached thereto. The Greens have communicated a change to the appointment in the Parliament Committee that is effective as of this announcement. Now, an announcement of the President. Mr. Ripa will be a part of the ITRE Committee and the SEDE Subcommittee on Security and Defense Committee. Thank you. Now, I'd like to move straight away to our agenda, which will be on the European Council and Commission statements. But Mr. Weber has asked for the floor. The floor is yours, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, before we start with the debate on the outcome of the European Council, I want to bring one very urgent issue to the attention of the plenary, and that is the situation in the Mediterranean Sea. So we saw the military actions from Turkish side. We also saw the decisions on the Hagia Sophia, which is an example of our religious chauvinism, that such a symbol and a monument of peace and reconciliation is now changed. That are the actions from the Turkish side. And I want to underline that this is not only a Greek-Turkish issue, it's not only a Cyprus-Turkish issue, it's an European-Turkish issue. And that's why in the presence of President Michel and President von der Leyen, we want to underline that we have to give clear signals that we stand on the side of our citizens in Greece and in Cyprus. And I think we should keep the dialogue open, no doubt about this. But now it's also time to act. Probably also to consider sanctions against Turkey. We have to act, and we have to act now. I want to bring this to the attention of the plenary.
Grazie.
Thank you, Chairman Weber. I should like to call on any of those colleagues who are here in their seat to please wear their mask pursuant to the rules that we have put into place. The agenda. European Council and Commission statements, conclusions of the extraordinary European Council meeting. I'd like to give the floor immediately to President Michel for his remarks. The floor is yours, sir.
Monsieur le
President, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Parliament.
Nights, these were complex negotiations on very complex issues. We agreed on the recovery package and the European budget, and this moment, it's my conviction, is pivotal in European history. We acted fast and with urgency. In less than 2 months, we hammered out a deal of more than 1.8 trillion euros. And this response is massive. Compared to the size of its economy, Europe's response is greater than that of the United States or China. In fact, this agreement is first in many ways. This is the first time in European history that we agree to borrow collectively to finance expenditure. It's also the first time that our budgetary funds are connected to our climate ambition, and it's the first time our budget will be directly linked to the rule of law. I am convinced that Europe is a force for action. Dear colleagues, today I stand before you with that agreement in hand, endorsed by unanimity, by all 27 leaders. Everyone had to give something in order to get something. It's a strong and ambitious deal for Europe, and for Europeans, it's fair, balanced and groundbreaking. Why? Because it will boost our 3 common goals: convergence, resilience and transformation. On the Recovery Fund, first, the Recovery Fund Next Generation EU is a one-off measure to address the impact of COVID-19, and I would like to stress that the total size of the Recovery Fund is 750 billion euros, 390 in grants and 360 in loans. And these funds will be targeted at the hardest hit regions and sectors. It targets 30% of the MFF and the Recovery Fund to fighting climate change, and we will make sure the Recovery Fund money is well spent by ensuring it in solid governance. Sur le budget,
On the budget, we're deciding to propose 1.074 billion euros. The commitment, mobilisation and the desire to succeed with these means have pushed our efforts then to reduce disparities in the EU, to boost convergence and promote transformation that's so urgent. Now, obviously, I know that the MFF, I know that some people are pointing to the cuts with respect to the Commission proposal, but from my side, just so you can get some perspective, look at the starting point. It is the money that today is spent for each of the policies of the EU. If we compare it with today, we can see that MFF, together with the Recovery Fund, are additional funds. It is additional to the amounts that are mobilised today in different areas: Digital, Horizon Europe, Erasmus, and finally, we are proposing a special reserve connected to Brexit, because we take on board the fact that with a deal or without a deal, if that's likely, we will have to support those countries, those sectors that are most directly affected by the economic fallout from Brexit. Now, I know there is one issue that mobilises a great deal of attention here. It also did during the summit, namely the rebates. Now, it's true that the rebates have been kept for one country, increase for 4 others. And it's true that that was part of the overall package agreement because we were aware of the need to mobilise monies for the recovery fund. So there was a political agreement that gave rise to that part of the decision. And then finally, the own resources. We've had a lot of debates, formal, informal, also here, in connection with this very crucial issue, because we consider that own resources could be a turning point in the way Europe envisages its future, and without which, I believe, we've actually delivered on top of what could have been imagined by specifying some political roadmaps. And in particular, let me flag up that we have an additional point with respect to the Commission's idea. In other words, that we're going to start the repayments under this MFF, this coming MFF, not the next one. And that is a very powerful tool politically to encourage the decision. We commit ourselves thereby, and we hope the Parliament will, and the heads of state and government are committing to this. This issue of the carbon border tax, digital financial transaction tax, the ETS system, plastic waste, there will be a lot on the table for a political democratic debate, real European democracy, but also in the national parliaments. And that's a good thing because we will be having this debate on the crucial steer of where we want the EU to go. And finally, the question of the role of the European Parliament. Obviously, that's an essential issue, and I'm quite sure it's going to be debated here quite apart from what already stands in the institutional setup and the role of the Parliament and its legislative work. And the significant amount of work is going to have to do with respect to the RRF, the Recovery and Resilience Fund. Para 11 of our conclusions, where we say there should be joint political sharing of the Council, Commission and Parliament on annual scrutiny of expenditure, and I'm quite sure we will continue the discussion on that. And finally, one point that is very close to my heart. It is 5 years now since I've had the responsibility to sit at the Council, and now I can see for the first time in 5 years I've chaired the summit. We've had a very long debate, and we looked at one another and discussed face to face the rule of law, this fundamental issue. Now, of course, this is not a conclusion of the debate, but it is an opening, and that's why I am delighted that what we're presenting to you actually sets out this link, this conditionality between the financial issue and governance, the issue of rule of law. Everyone will have to play their part. The Commission, obviously, in connection with the institutional setup, the European Parliament, the European Council as well, in connection with its responsibility to give a political steer. They will not be able to avoid coming back regularly again and again to this subject, and I would ensure that this central issue, this vital, fundamental issue for Europe will remain at the heart of the debate. Let me conclude by saying the following. Ladies and gentlemen, a few days ago we topped 600,000 deaths worldwide because of COVID. COVID has shaken us. It has completely overturned the way our democratic societies were functioning. We had to restrain fundamental freedoms, and our healthcare systems were greatly tested. And I'm quite sure that a post-COVID world will have to be different. It would have to be more committed, more solid, more grounded, because of the needs of humanity that we can all see before us. So the deal that I'm presenting you today, to my mind, of course, is a financial deal, but it's much more than that, because through the debate that we're opening now, it is really about the meaning and the direction that we wish to give to this European project in the coming years. That's what's on the agenda, and I do believe this is a historic moment. And allow me a moment of romanticism. I think it was a historic moment to decide on a roadmap for own resources, to decide that we were going to take up common debt, to invest And effectively what we've done then is renewing our European marriage vows for 30 years. We have confirmed European unity, and more than ever, I believe that we're sending a clear signal to the Europeans, one of confidence, a robust one of a solid situation, the signal to the rest of the world that Europe is present, Europe is solid, Europe is on its feet. Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Thank you, President Michel. I now should like to give the floor to the President of the Commission, Madam von der Leyen. The floor is yours, Madam.
$600,000 victims of this killer virus. 600,000 lives that ended too early. 600,000 stories which were only half written. 600,000 families which are not complete. These 600,000 people will remain in our memories and in our hearts. And we know that it's not the end, unfortunately, not yet. And behind this sad cortege, we see the impact on our economies, on our workers, on our companies. Everybody's suffering, everybody's fighting. This pandemic struck us at the beginning of the year. And let's remember what those days were like. We saw the graphs showing more and more death. There was a threat of a gulf between our countries. We heard some very wounding criticisms. We had a gulf between the North and the South. We had a debate on Europa bonds which didn't go anywhere. The situation was gloomy, and that there weren't a lot of ways forward. The few solutions that were tabled were intergovernmental solutions. In other words, out with the EU context, without the European Parliament, without our institutions. And let me remind you, we were unable to agree on the European budget 2 years after we'd made the proposal. This is why the European Commission made a European proposal. We wanted to avoid the reflexes and the errors of the past. We made a European proposal for European recovery. Next generation EU.
We all know that Europe is not out of the woods yet. But Europe can see now dawn turning into light. This week, not only taboos and perceptions have been cast aside, but one big watershed for our union has been crossed by standing united. 27 member states backing the Commission. We raise money on the capital market to fight the worst economic crisis ever, together. In Next Generation EU, we now have a unique recovery tool worth 750 billion euro. 750 billion euros to support the hardest hit. 750 billion euros to boost our single market. 750 billion euros to invest in the European Green Deal, in digitization, in the modernization of our single market, in resilience. Of course, 27 countries agreeing something on this scale and of this unique nature is a challenge. It takes courage, political will, and of course, give and take. It was never going to be easy. But anything worth having is always worth fighting for. And I thank you, Michel, for the excellent cooperation and the trustworthy management. Thank you very much for that. And look at how far Europe's fighting spirit has taken us. It is not long ago that some asked for no grants, loans only. But today, we have an agreement that Next Generation EU will have 390 billion grants, topped by 360 billion in loans. And yes, there are fewer grants than the Commission and the Parliament argued for. But from where we started, this is an enormous achievement, and this is big enough to make an enormous difference. It will invest in reforms linked to our European priorities, in line with our country-specific recommendations. And because this is a European investment in our European Union, it is essential that the European Parliament plays a key role. As co-legislator, this House will have its full say on the design of the facility and how it works. The Commission will ensure full transparency, including through standing ready for structured dialogue on priorities and expenditures, and a regular exchange of views on national plans and overall implementation. And this is how, together, we can ensure that Next Generation EU delivers where it really matters. This is also how we can ensure that Next Generation EU accelerates the twin and digital transformation. 30% of Next Generation EU and our MFF will be spent on climate-related projects. And if we get it right, I believe that Next Generation EU can be one of the largest stimulus for investment and reforms anywhere in the world. Investing in rollout of 5G, grid infrastructure, in AI, in industrial digitization, in renewables, sustainable transport, energy efficient buildings, you name it. And this is how we fight climate change and modernize. This stimulus will also support much needed structural reforms to make us more resilient. And we will have a Just Transition Fund to support those people, those regions and sectors who have indeed a bigger step to take. As you know, I would have liked more. But this week's agreement ensures a 125% increase in the size of the Just Transition Fund, now worth 17.5 billion euro. And that will make a real difference on the ground. Honourable members, the big winner of this summit are the new own resources. We have now a unanimous agreement on the need for new own resources. We have a clear timetable, and we have them linked to repayment. And this is a huge and historic step forward for our Union, which both the Commission and the Parliament have long been pushing for. Now we have no time to waste. The Commission will come forward with a package of new own resources. This will include a digital levy. We will also put forward a carbon border adjustment mechanism and an extension of the emission trading system. The two go hand in hand. We need to put a price on carbon in all key sectors of the economy at home, and we need to avoid carbon leakage from elsewhere to make sure that we are sustainable and competitive. Honourable members, allow me to come to another issue which is at the heart of what our union is all about, our values. These values, including the respect for the rule of law, and they are the very foundation of our union. These values, they are mandatory and they are priceless. The European Council has stated a clear commitment to respecting the rule of law and protecting our financial interests. And I not only strongly welcome this, also because it is of utmost importance, with even more public money on the table than ever before, with Next Generation EU. But against this background, the Commission will now follow up. We will look into our 2018 proposal for the rule of law. We will work together with the co-legislators to ensure that our 2018 proposal is taken forward and, when necessary, improved. Protecting our budget and the respect for the rule of law go hand in hand. And we must also do everything we can to protect European money by stepping up the fight against fraud. This means having the right controls in place, including a database that puts us in the position to know who the final beneficiaries of EU funding are. And we will work closely with the Parliament to make this happen in the next weeks and months. Honourable members, I started by saying that the European Council's agreement provided the light at the end of the tunnel. But with light also comes shadow. And in this case, the shadow is in the form of a very lean long-term EU budget. There are regrettable and painful decisions on many programmes which have crucial European added values. I am thinking of Horizon, our essential health programme, of InvestEU. Yes, all these have been increased, but certainly not as much as we would have liked. And I believe the size of our external funds, in particular, is really concerning. And we should always remember that the value of EU programmes far outweigh their costs. Yes, we managed to avoid even further cuts, as some member states wanted. But this MFF is a difficult pill to swallow. And I know this House feels the same way. And here again, we should also take a step back and look at where we are coming from. Before we even started, this budget had a hole of around 70 billion euros because of Brexit, with one big member state less contributing. Good news is that we have managed to plug almost all of that gap. That means that every country has to pay more. And when you put Next Generation EU on top, we now have a massive and unprecedented financial firepower, 1.8 trillion. That is almost 13% of our EU 27 GNI. And MFF and Next Generation EU together will increase the percentage of modern policies to over 50%. Just look around the world to see who else can say the same as us. Meine Damen und Herren,
ladies and gentlemen,
etwas Historisches für Europa zu erreichen. Der Druck der Krise hat Türen geöffnet, die ganz, ganz lange verschlossen waren. Und so traurig der Anlass.
We have the chance to do something historical for Europe. This crisis has broken open doors which have been closed for a long time. 10 years ago, in the financial and euro crisis, we managed to save the euro and the union from falling apart. But the internal price of that was terrible. We had our economies developing in different directions. Young people had to leave their homes in the search of work and a future. There were more and more debts between countries, and those scars are still visible today. Now we're doing something completely differently, and we're doing a lot, I believe, in a better way. 750 billion euro, most in the form of grants, is a great sign of solidarity. Next Generation EU is much more than just money. In past crises, the member states worked around the EU institutions because there was a lack of confidence. That meant that there was no influence, and the European Parliament had no influence and no way of shaping policy. This is different. This time we're moving towards a common solution, partly because the Commission has really worked towards this and has made a very wise proposal. Next Generation EU will enable all member states to help their companies and their people in the same way, without cutting off the air supply to the national budgets. And Next Generation EU is going to bring us closer together and heal old wounds. This time we're taking on our shoulders the responsibility of the future of Europe, and we're all shouldering together the future of our children. This is a burden that we can all carry together proudly and with great strength. Long live Europe.
Grazie.
Thank you, President von der Leyen. And now we will hear from the political groups. For the EPP, Manfred Weber, go ahead, please.
President Sassoli, President Michel, President von der Leyen, dear colleagues, solidarity is coming home. That is the main message of the outcome of the Council meeting. During these last days, we also saw the alternative, a possible horror scenario of nationalism and egoism. And we as EPP, we are very happy now that the European Council sends now a clear signal of togetherness. Nowhere else in the world, 27 countries, states, are giving such a strong and united answers to the COVID crisis like we do in Europe. That's why I want to thank Charles Michel, I want to thank Ursula von der Leyen, also Angela Merkel, also our president, for the negotiations. A lot of sleepless nights, but finally with a good outcome. You did a great job in holding Europe together, and the EPP group is supporting the spirit of solidarity and togetherness. I'm happy about the agreement, no doubt about that, but I'm not happy about the deal. And yes, we welcome the outcome of the Council meeting, but we are living in a parliamentarian democracy, and that means that the outcome is now arriving here in the European Parliament, and the role all over Europe is that there will be never the same output after a parliamentarian consultation than the input was from the Council side. That is now ahead of us, and this means not to delay things, because I hear these arguments now around the corridors. The first MFF proposal, Ursula von der Leyen referred to this, the first MFF proposals was on the table of the Council in 2018. So don't tell us about delaying things. There was a lot of time for doing the job. That's why what we are doing now what we are doing now is a normal consent procedure that will start based on the Lisbon Treaty. And yes, there are a lot of points where we have to criticise. And Ursula, we are for the moment not ready to swallow the bitter pill you referred to. And that is especially the MFF. On the MFF, we think that it is not giving proper answers to the challenges of the next 7 years. It has to be more future-orientated. And I, as an elected member of a parliament, I also refer again to my promises I gave to my voters. The EPP promised, for example, a strong and effective coastal and border guard, and now not enough money for doing so. The EPP promised that Europe will tackle the big diseases like, for example, cancer together. And now, dramatical cuts in the health budget directly in corona times. Unbelievable what we are doing there. EPP promised a strong boost for European innovation. Once the European Council formulated the 3% target to finance innovation, we are losing ground towards China and Asia. On innovation, we are losing simply our future, and now cuts on Horizon. And the EPP promised a strong Europe in the world. And now defence, Africa, neighbourhood, cuts, cuts, cuts. That is the first point we have to talk about. The second point is Europe is not a cash machine for national budgets. The proposal on the table brings us to a renationalisation of the European money, of the European budget. 90% of the 750 billion euros in Next Generation EU fund will go directly to the member states' budget. Until today, nobody knows exactly what this money will be spent for. Each leader came back home in the last days with a nice envelope of money, but is there really a European spirit behind when we spend now the money? My fear is that this will be spent here and there in purely national favourites. The French finance minister said already we will use it for social projects. In other countries they will build motorways, and in other countries they will lower their taxes to create growth. That is the reality when we see the debate European-wide. And in a couple of months we will sit again here together in the European Parliament and will complain that the citizens don't understand what is the purpose of European money, what is the idea of European money. We will complain that the people don't see the added value of Europe. And that is the drama that we will face if, again, we don't use this money for clear European projects like our predecessors did, for example, with Airbus. They did it. That's why we think that the countries, the Council, should have had agreed on, for example, a real 5G transnational network, on an EU battery project, on a plan for EU hydrogen, where each member state is using his envelope for these investments. Citizens can now count on the European Parliament, that we don't give up on this idea. We want to have a say on what the money, the EU money, will be spent for, and we will be the watchdog on the European added value. And I ask President Michel and also President von der Leyen to formally propose a list of 5 or 6 or 7 EU industrial innovation projects that each and every member state would commit to contribute to finance through the recovery fund they receive in the next upcoming months and years. And thirdly, we have to speak about rule of law again. The first time we link European money to a binding rule of law mechanism is positive, but when I see today the statements of our leaders, then I'm a little bit confused. Macron says that money will be only spent with respecting rule of law, and others say there is no link. And that's why, Ursula, we have to be clear on this. We need a roadmap, we need a clear plan for implementing the principle no money without respecting the European rules and the European mechanisms. And then we are ready. I want to thank again for the outcome. After the European Council, we have to work hard now for a good and quick solution. Let's use now the time ahead of us to find a solution and to improve the deal. We are ready to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, President Weber. Now for the Socialists and Democrats, Irashi Garcia Perez.
Thank you, President. President Michel, President von der Leyen. Allow me to begin by giving you some words from Herrera Lopez, who is a nurse in Spain. Last week at the funeral, the state funeral, on behalf of the victims, said, "We have given everything that we have. We have worked to the extent that was absolutely possible, and we have better understood precisely why we choose this profession, to take care of people and to save lives. Many of the people that we work with had to give their lives for that purpose. We were able to cover the basic needs of individuals, both in health and emotional, and we were those who sat and said goodbye. We're the last people to whom those who died alone were able to speak, and even were able to mediate between children who were at home and them. We held their hands, and we were able to also hold back many tears." Now, this is the worst crisis of our generation. The European Union must face this, must assist this generation and future generations. The agreement that was met in the Council, Mr. Michel and Ms. van der Leyen, will go down in history of the European Union. For the very first time in the European Union's history, the member states have decided to issue joint debt. This is something that would have been unthinkable just a few months back. And I'd like to remind you that it was this Parliament that put forth this proposal in the first place. And I think we should feel extremely proud as an institution. Now, reject because of unanimity of bonds is something that needs to be addressed. Over years, individual vetoes have shown their darkest face in the community life. And now we have the Conference of the Future of Europe. This is going to be an amazing opportunity for us to be able to choose a new way to make decisions in the European project. Now, thank you. I think we have been able to see that the European Union can learn from its mistakes of the 2008 crisis. Austerity saved banks and left behind people. Today we see now that we are focusing on individuals, on people, and we have to focus absolutely every effort that we are making on affecting those transformations that are necessary for a greener, a fairer, a more digitized society. Social democracy will not allow for this to fall, the burden to fall on the most vulnerable. That is why we are requesting a roadmap with binding commitments on new own resources that will not strangle national budgets, nor will they undermine purchasing power of taxpayers. Let us take this crisis and come forward with fair taxation. We absolutely need the tax systems in member states to address the fact that there are some multinationals that are saving millions and millions to the detriment of our societies. We have no time to lose. The virus continues to hit us hard. We have to be able to make sure that we are implementing this recovery plan as quickly as possible. When it comes to the budget, the Parliament will negotiate on equal footing with the Council for the Recovering Fund as well as the upcoming MFF. Now, we are fully cognizant of the fact that we are at a historic moment in time, and that will not allow us, however, to leave behind the MFF. Social Democrats will not accept cuts on future-oriented programs that we absolutely need to strengthen our autonomy and our strategic position. We will work in the negotiations that we hope will begin as quickly as possible to increase the financing of programs including Horizon 2020, InvestEU, Life Erasmus, Europe, Digital Europe, as well as cooperation and development aid. Our ability to recover cannot be at the cost of those who need our assistance the most, who live in the worse conditions than us. Solidarity within Europe, but also without Europe. We must be resolute when it comes to any type of proposal that might sap the rule of law that we have decided to build strongly together. These are things that must be upheld in the European Union. Social Democrats will stand by this. Not a single euro to a government that does not uphold rule of law and the fundamental values of the European Union. Comrades, when policy is no longer useful for citizens, well, then society stops to believe in politics. And it is now time for us to take politics with a capital P and turn it into policy to make sure that we can leave behind single interests and move towards the common interest. That is precisely what we need to defend. A young person said to me on the social media that we have to make sure that that another type of Europe is possible. We hold that in our hands. Let us commit to that. Let us commit to that for Europe, for our citizens. Another Europe is possible. Thank you.
Grazie, Presidente Garcia Perez.
Thank you very much, Madam Garcia Perez. And now for Renew, Dashan Cholos. Go ahead, please.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President, Mr. President, Madam President. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the President of the European Council, Michel, for his determination to forge a compromise, and in particular, Charles, that you've been able to build a relationship of trust with the European Parliament. That's essential for what we need to do together. We need to say that. In just a matter of weeks, Europe has been able to show unprecedented solidarity. We are taking up a joint debt, which we will have to repay together to respond to one of the worst crises ever experienced. My group, Renew Europe, has made the recovery plan its hobby horse since April and May, and we're pleased to see that it's seeing the light of day now. However, this is a historic dimension. The historic nature of the agreement of the Council should not prevent us from actually seeing what's on the table in terms of our ambitions for Europe and for the euro. The Council prefers to prioritise the European Fund to opt for national programmes rather than community programmes. This logic in favour of national interest should not undermine our ability to develop a truly European investment strategy, and this programme of European debt that we're going to have to repay together makes no sense if we do not finance real European projects. And that is the task of this Parliament. The national programmes will have to integrate these European priorities, and the Parliament should ensure it is able to push for this in an interinstitutional agreement on implementation of these programmes. In order for there to be agreement, we need an MFF that has sufficient means to finance our future-oriented policies. Digital, research, youth, Erasmus, the health programme for crisis, that's essential. That's one of the lessons that we need to draw from this crisis. That cannot be sacrificed in favour of the return for member states. We also need clear commitment for own resources. It simply wouldn't be serious to take up such a loan without knowing how we're going to pay it back. And clear interinstitutional agreement is indispensable to allow us to adopt these new own resources before the start of the repayment of these recovery loans. That's our condition. We have to adopt a very clear roadmap before we start repaying the debt. And finally, my group will give final agreement if and only if the package contains solid guarantees in terms of linking the European Recovery Fund to the rule of law. Not a mere declaration, but it's got to be actual facts on the ground. This mechanism has to be effective. We need new provisions with very clear rules, not against Hungary or against Poland or against any particular member state, but to guarantee that European money no longer finances politicians in power who are turning their backs every day to our fundamental values. President, the European Summit showed again that the European project cannot limit itself to the sum of international interests where everyone is wielding their veto. We have to act together, and the Conference of the Future of Europe has to be an opportunity to redefine governance and to make European interest prevail with the single aim of reinvigorating the magic of the European project. Thank you very much.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Mr. Cholos. And now for ID, Nicolas Bay.
Un jour historique pour l'Europe.
The French President Emmanuel Macron said that it was a historical day for Europe, but that cannot wipe away the fact that we have distinct problems across the political spectrum. We deplore how difficult it is to get anywhere. Within 48 hours, we were able to call a meeting to hail the decision taken a few days ago, and that relegates our role to the backbench. We need a minimum of time of serenity in order to do something significant, and the fact that we don't have time today is because we wasted a lot yesterday, because the European institutions were absent in the crisis. We needed to found a Europe on interdependence, and we actually missed this rendezvous with grandeur because we were just running forward without looking where we're going and without recognizing our errors. We were absent in the crisis. The EU was absent in the crisis and is now coming up with a recovery plan which has been negotiated in pain in order to make people forget the failure. 92 hours of painful negotiation shows that we're still talking about federal approach. Yes, Mr. Macron, Ms. Merkel, we're still having the same situation. We have gone to 500 billion to less than 500 billion in the first table round, and we have swept aside Erasmus, the CAP and research, but the ideological problem is still there. We're taking yet another step towards European unity by having a mutual debt. But what is the benefit for the countries? What is the real benefit for our peoples? This economic support could have been organized by each country so that each country could decide how to spend this money rather than having it dictated to by the Commission. This is a mixture of grandiosity and bad faith. We're now talking about debts which have to be repaid through own resources, and this is another step towards the European state. Plastic state, with plastic tax, we're talking about carbon tax. It is the 7 contributing countries which are going to support the debt. They're going to have to shoulder most of the debt. For example, France will have 40 billion out of 750 and will have to shoulder more and more repayments. President Macron said that the health crisis should not be the new pretext for continuing to build a Europe without the peoples.
Thank you. For the Greens, President Lambert, you have the floor.
Presidente.
Thank you, President. They are called Mark Rutte, Dutch Liberal, Sebastian Kurz, an Austrian Christian Democrat, Mette Frederiksen, Sanna Marin, and Stefan Löfven. They are Scandinavian socialists. They like to refer to themselves as the frugals, but I prefer to refer to them as misers. For them, the European Union is simply a money pump that their countries pay far too much into. This is an unprecedented crisis, and they could, at best, be an intermediary between the member states that are struggling and the financial markets to avoid an outburst in tension in the monetary union that could wind up being fatal. However, rather than explaining to their citizens, these misers could explain to their citizens precisely how much they have benefited from European economic integration, and that their contribution to the European budget should be commensurate with the benefit. Very cynically, they would like to just be able to keep the cake without paying the fair price. They are called Viktor Orban. He is a Hungarian Christian Democrat, as well as Morawiecki, who is a Polish conservative. They are often referred to as liberals, but I like to refer to them as pseudo-democrats, and they usually consider the European Union as a money pump to the profit of themselves, their oligarchs, and their countries. But if they were honest with themselves, they would explain to their citizens how much their citizens benefit from Europe and their fact that they undertook commitments for their accession, beginning with the respect of freedoms and the rule of law. More specifically, they would, and cynically, they would like to be able to eat their cake and ask for a smile from the baker too. Unlike them, the majority of heads in state and government were able to work together and recognize the gravity of the moment. More than 200,000 Europeans have perished because of the pandemic, and this has aggravated inequalities. Meanwhile, we are running out of time for climate action. Moreover, we are faced with Xi Jinping's China, Trump's the United States, Putin's Russia, or Erdogan's Turkey, and the EU feels very alone indeed in defending human rights and a rules-based world order. But here we were, 27 heads of state and government had to decide in unanimous fashion, placing them at the mercy of the extremists. We saw that the budget was lopped off, and that this lopping off really hit the joint programs first and foremost, specifically those future-oriented programs. Once more, we need great amount of investment. Never before have we needed such investment, specifically when it comes to the mainstreaming of the Green Deal. By way of an example, there were huge cuts to the rural development, the greenest portion of the CAP. This has been slashed in half. And at a time when the world is very concerned about a second wave of infections, European leaders have decided to drastically cut programs for research and public health. How can we accept that? Cutting health programs during a pandemic is just irresponsible. And the cherry on top, the Mises got the biggest cuts to their contribution compared to the past. On a positive side, what we have seen is that there is a 30% of European expenditure to fight climate change. However, without specific binding measures as well as the implementation, this might just be a glossing over. And when it comes to the rule of law, we can see that this lacks detail, and nothing leads us to believe that it will be something that can be implementable. Despite all of that, thanks to the perseverance of Angela Merkel and Charles Michel, for the very first time we were going to see a massive joint borrowing program. The big question is how this will be repaid. It's a huge blind spot in our opinion. In our opinion, we believe that the European Union member states should give the European Union the ability to levy tax, not only on multinationals who are avoiding tax, and not just the digital sector, but also any activity that is highly polluting. With all of these own resources that could be adapted, and we could set up a prototype that would be able to be put into place with specific circumscribing of this. Otherwise, the EU might become insignificant. Now, despite all of these unsavory meanderings, what we know is that there was great confidence. The European Parliament will have its full responsibility as a part of the budgetary approval process. We have reached out a hand to the Council and the Commission, and my colleagues will be a part of all of this, and we will do that both in terms of the amount as well as the type of dispense, as well as the general interest will be our guiding light in all of this. Now, I wanted to conclude, Mr. President, and address the misers and the pseudo-democrats. Through their discourse and their acts, they are reducing the European Union into a simple money pit or into some sort of a new makeup of the USSR. And day after day after day, what they are doing is poisoning their citizens with nationalism. They are pitting European citizens against themselves. We know that the British Conservatives did the same thing, and we know where they stand today. On the other hand, what we should do, rather than turn our back on this, we as Europeans need to stand shoulder to shoulder, be a part of this, day after day, to make sure that we establish a dignified life for all of our citizens. It is together that we are going to be able to find the intelligence to establish the path towards the 21st century. That is precisely what our combat is, and we will never let it down. Thank you.
Thank you, President Lambert. Before we continue the discussion, I will now open the first round of voting. We'll vote on the amendments to the draft resolution and the conclusions of the Extraordinary Council. The voting round will be at 10:30. At 11:45. The method will be the same used as in previous rounds. The voting round is open now. You have until 11:45 and we'll have the results at 1:30. Thank you. Now, Mr. Zile for the ECR, please.
Microphone.
Honourable Presidents of the Commission, of the Council and the Commission, ahead of the European Council, the ECR had a clear message: it was time to act. Also, it took many days. European Council did it. There were not easy decisions, taking many days of negotiations. The result contains compromises and requires significant flexibility. But overall, the outcome shows that mutual respect for all nation states allows to bring to the reasonable deal or agreement or some kind of processes like Manfred Weber described, which allows us to move forward. Also, there are others in this House who disagree. Citizens across Europe look first and foremost for their national governments to provide a response to the pandemic. While we stand together in solidarity, the ECR considers it right that national governments are empowered to direct the response and swiftly deliver necessary support. As member states decide measures what kind should be taken when they save the citizens during pandemic, governments also have to deliver in the best way using solidarity resources, of course with scrutiny, and at the same time we have to remember the most important is to give back to our people hopes, jobs and income to survive and to have a good future. Well, the Marathon Summit both the conclusions is not the end of the road, and we as a group see the clear issues to be resolved. Concerning the funds will not immediately be available to those countries and communities most affected by coronavirus. The ECR struggles to accept that funds would not be available until 12 months or more after the darkest periods of pandemic experience so far across many member states. This is clear risk, and response to this crisis, we risk to delay, and it would be a dangerous movement and response from the citizens. We stand ready to make necessary improvements by engaging in a constructive manner to finalising the agreement as soon as possible. Just there are issues to resolve. There are areas in the MFF particularly where we can do better. We regret the cuts to agriculture, regional development, turning money away from economic development and other key goals. Reduction to other significant programmes, including those to deliver on the digital agenda, a competitive single market with a strong focus on employment and a geopolitical agenda, risks leaving Europe ill-equipped to deal with the challenges arising from the global competitors. And finally, we must therefore still enter negotiations in MFF where the role of Parliament is clear. It will be not easy. We are divided by member states, by political views, but I think we don't need to delay this procedure and to finalise the best possible in these circumstances a deal. Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Thank you. On behalf of the group of European United Left, Nordic Green Left, Mr. Schödemann, the floor is yours.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Thank you very much, President, Ms. von der Leyen, Mr. Michel. You won't be surprised to hear that I'm not that enthusiastic. Finally, the Member States have been able to agree on a recovery fund for which the Commission will take up debt. So far, so good. We've had to wait a long time for this very humble signal of solidarity. The Commission or the EU is called upon to find an answer to the crisis of COVID-19 and the economic and digitization crisis in the country. If we miss the boat on this one, then that's very disappointing. Instead of having an ambitious recovery plan, we now have an instrument which is not only far below the amount we want in order to sort out a problem of 10% of GDI, but is totally counterproductive in terms of the demand and the investments. We could have had a completely new departure, but we missed this, and the thinking of nation states has dominated. The member states were not able to decide even of rule of law, equality of men and women, the right to organize, and freedom of speech are not goods that you can sell off for a few billion. These are basic tenets. The idea of taking up debt is a good one. For the moment, it's not going to. Plastic tax, 3 billion per year, means that we're talking about 130 years. Social solidarity also means fair tax, and we need to have fair taxation of the digital value, 8 million, and a tax for super rich companies. They have got to contribute to the recovery, and there you will find the additional funds that you need. Mr. Michel, instead of being carried away and talking about tax paradise, we should close down the tax paradise, the tax havens within Europe. These are things that we've said frequently in the Parliament. We need more investment in the future. So it's not credible that we save in areas like digitization and health or in the Just Transition Fund, while at the same time we have military spending and investment in weapon systems which are growing and growing. Last weekend, Europe missed an opportunity. I'm not sure that there will be a second opportunity. Thank you for your attention.
Grazie.
Thank you. Chairman Shirdovan. On behalf of the non-attached members, Mr. John Russo, the floor is yours for a minute and a half.
Colleagues, today is a historic day for all European citizens. We're experiencing a huge change. We've been expecting it for decades with respect to the European policies carried out blindly for years, impoverishing millions of citizens. As an Italian, as a European, I'd like to thank President Giuseppe Conte, Prime Minister, for the excellent result in the Council, and my Cinque Stelle movement for the synergy. Next Generation EU has to be an end once and for all to austerity policies that have impoverished people and created discrimination between different citizens, different states. Let's turn the page and let's do it once and for all. Let's not cut these programmes. We hope to correct that. This change cannot just be about the post-COVID emergency, but has to be the paradigm for a future Europe, with sharing the risks, solidarity between people, authentic growth, taking care of the environment. Let us commit to stick to the promises made today without ever turning back, respecting the spirit of the founding fathers, without whom Europe would not have a reason for being. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Muresan Siegfried, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The microphone wants me to thank you 3 times. I can gladly do this. President von der Leyen, President Michel, we welcome the agreement reached on the recovery package. And the message from the European Parliament is clear. We welcome the ambitious support of 750 billion euros. Help is coming for the people affected by the coronavirus, for the enterprises affected, and for the regions affected by this virus. Now, it is very important that we get this right, that money is being used to modernise, to further develop the European Union. And one thing is clear, the more we spend, the better the control needs to be. Democratic and parliamentary scrutiny, transparency and the safe for the European Parliament, this is all important for us. On the budget for the next 7 years, we need to get this right, because this is the budget of the European Union also for the time after Corona. It's here to stay, it needs to be ambitious, and it needs to be enough to fulfil the promises which we have made to the people of Europe. We saw in the Council 27 presidents and prime ministers fight for 27 national perspectives. Now the European Parliament will fight for the European perspective. We have listened to the Council. Now is the time for the Council to listen to the European Parliament. What are our demands? What do we want? We want more young people to be able to travel and study in other countries to better know the European Union and the European way of living in different countries here in unity in the Union. For this, we need a bigger budget for Erasmus scholarships. We want us to be able to build more hospitals, to modernise existing hospitals. For this, we need an ambitious EU for Health programme, and we want Europe to be more innovative, to research more. For this, we need to prioritise the Horizon Europe programme. We want no one to be left behind in the transition to a green economy. The Just Transition Fund needs to be enforced. These are our expectations, these are our demands in order for us to be able to support the budget of the European Union for the next 7 years. President von der Leyen, you said the budget is a bitter pill that needs to be swallowed. We do not want to swallow it in this form. We want to negotiate. We want to improve it. We want to start negotiations fast. We want to conclude negotiations fast and to have a vote fast because President von der Leyen, you were a minister. President Michel, you were a prime minister. You know the last say on the budget always is in the parliament. This is why I say let's start the final negotiations fast and give a message to the people of Europe that we have an ambitious budget for the next 7 years. Thank you.
Madam Bonafé. Simona, 2 minutes.
President.
Thank you, President. Finally, the European Council has actually been able to make a step forward. We can talk about a European response to the economic and social crisis of the COVID pandemic. And for the first time, we can talk about common European debt to be able to help our economies recover. Now, the next generation EU means that Europe has prevailed and that people can move beyond from the fact that Europe serves no purpose and that it was better to stay within our member states, defend our national interests as if national interests were different from European interests. And then came the coronavirus, much suffering, specifically for those who perished, and then many who lost their jobs and who will perhaps never find a job again. We can see that alone we are much weaker. And we've also learned that from a crisis you have to be able to emerge with a joint, strong European project. That is why today, President Michel, we need to make an additional effort altogether. The Recovery Fund is a step forward. However, MFF is not up to the task. It is not enough. It is not adequate. And we are here for that. Of course, we need extraordinary resources to make sure that our economies recover. That must be in the general interest of all. And we need the recovery plans, of course, for relaunching our economy. And we need to make sure that the conditions are in place for that to be able to succeed. We also have to make sure that the programs of the European Union can continue and are solid for the future that we all want together. The Green Deal, first and foremost. If we're going to look to the next generations of Europeans, and in fact we are calling the program Next Generation EU, therefore we cannot accept that a program like Horizon or the Just Transition Fund, Invest EU for the competitiveness of our companies, Health of Europe for Health, or Erasmus, that they be so drastically cut. No more can we accept that European resources go to those who do not protect our resources. We cannot use our funds for those who sap our values. Now, we've made a major step forward, but we have more to do. Citizens of Europe are looking to Europe. They have great confidence, and let us not waste this opportunity. Mr. Garicano, 2 minutes. Go ahead, Luis.
Lo hemos conseguido.
We've done it. Now, many here in this House, many in the Commission, Madam von der Leyen and the Council, Charles, Michel, we've worked tirelessly to agree on an ambitious recovery fund which will allow Europe to tackle the crisis together. The European Parliament showed the way with 2 resolutions in April and May that showed that it was possible to arrive at an agreement if we all think like Europeans. Europe has done its work, and now the countries, all the countries, have to do their work. Some are already celebrating achievement. However, the work still needs to be done. The governments who are going to receive these funds still haven't done anything to resolve the problems that these funds are there to help resolve. We're just at the start of a very long path ahead of us, which we need to approve. so as to give the green light to these changes and transitions that our countries need. Nothing is for free. At the same time, you cannot defend then this money that's going to be taken as debt. We cannot put that as a legacy, as a burden for our future generations. But no, instead we want to build a better society. And for this reason, we have to use these resources for future-oriented investments. We have to make the message loud and clear in all corners of Europe. We have to explain that the reforms that have been delayed, they're necessary now. We must use this opportunity to have a more humane Europe where we all are able to enjoy our freedoms, respecting of the environment, based on a knowledge economy and also valuing human beings. Now, the way we use this money will then determine how we come out of the crisis. It's a time for responsibility. The European Parliament has to do everything it can to ensure that these major investments are properly spent. Thank you.
Thank you. For 1.5 minutes, Mr. Companossi, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. Thank you, President Michel and President von der Leyen, for being here this morning. Now, this debate is crucial, of course, but if we don't give it an introduction, I think we're going to lose sight of what's important. Over the course of recent years, we've seen that the European Union have come up with complex rules that are incomprehensible for our citizens, a system of rules that has contributed to the finality that Europe, even prior to the COVID crisis, in fact, specifically prior to the crisis, that it was the part of the world that was economically growing the least. Now, I think that we have to consider this critically. It is a serious problem. As many have said, the agreement that was come to at the Council is macroeconomically important, specifically the benefits to my country. Of course, we haven't actually understood precisely what type of resources will come to the countries and what types of measures will be taken. And there are some things that we're really concerned about because it might actually not contribute to assisting those sectors that need it the most. On the contrary, we don't know what the recommendations will be from the Commission to my country. Will they ask us to cut our social services and our health services? I wouldn't want us to come back here in a few years' time to know that our systems were cut in Italy to finance electric scooters being produced in China. I do want this type of hypocrisy that has prevailed from Maastricht to Lisbon. Well, I wouldn't want that to be fully not lifted today, because what we can see is that the crisis today hasn't fully been taken measure of at this time, and I hope that this is clearly not a silver bullet, and we need to take note of that.
Thank you. For 2.5 minutes, Mr. Andreasen.
Thank you. The
first time in the history of the European Union, we are incurring common debt and investing in an economic crisis. The Greens welcome this paradigm shift. It is a very clever approach. If we want to come out strengthened from the economic crisis, we need economic and monetary union. However, the price for this step was very high. We would say it was too high for agreement to the recovery package. Mr. Michel, you have sacrificed the EU budget. Instead of being European, the billions are going to be spent nationally. After a few difficult years, in 2024, we're going to have a very low European budget. Your only ambition was to buy the Frugal Five with rebates. Research, protection of the environment, people in poor regions, Erasmus, these are the ones who are paying the price of your budget decisions. You are paying the price for these rebates to arrogant heads of government. Please tell us why this response to the worst global pandemic is actually then seeing a cut to a common health programme. There's no sense to that. The 30% climate investment are a step in the right direction. climate protection, but many of us here in the Parliament have fought for more investment in the climate. But in order to stick to the Paris Agreement, it's simply not enough. We need more investment in climate protection, in particular biodiversity. We have to ensure that no single European project in the budget is not compatible with Paris. Dirty fossil fuels should no longer be subsidised. Mr. Michel, the Greens are ashamed of the fact that when it comes to rule of law, the agreement actually ended up giving prize to Viktor Orban. Our rule of law and democracy should go without saying, because the EU is not a cash machine. Your proposal makes it too easy for Orban and others to block these measures in the future. So you're going to have to count on major opposition from the European Parliament. Now, the European Parliament, we're not just in the gallery. We are key players in the budget. We are going to enter the negotiations very seriously, but we're going to be tough because we cannot accept the budget that you have presented.
Thank you. For 1.5 minutes, Mr. Van Overtveld.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The European Council has achieved an agreement, and that was essential because the European institutions cannot fail to act at a time when the COVID crisis is resulting in huge economic impetus. We needed a leverage to make sure that our economies could recover, but there are a couple of points I'd like to take out. First of all, conditionality. Where there is an emergency brake provided, I'm not terribly clear how that is going to work. It's not clear. When will it work? Will it work? And what happens if there's a deadlock? And the second point that's not clear is when it comes to repayment. I see certain principles and I see an outline of how that's to be done, but the actual structure of how this is going to be done, and we're talking about 750 billion, the detail is really not clear. And there's every guarantee that there will be a lot of discussions in the future on this. And then on the guarantee criteria, including historical unemployment, are not very clear to me. There are things that are just not very crystal clear. And I regret the fact that the agreement cuts into the MFF when it comes to research and development programs, which is something that we absolutely require in order to make our economy stronger and more flexible. Thank you.
Thank you. For 2 minutes, Mr. Gushmao.
Thank you, Madam President. Joint European debt issuance is an unprecedented step and so important. Let us talk about that debt. Until we have own resources, we're not going to be able to make a single step forward in the Council. All we are doing is taking money from future budgets and using it now. We're not talking about debt here. I don't think we should pull the wool over our citizens' eyes. With this debt, we are going back to macroeconomic conditionality that took the European Union into a disastrous solution for a crisis back in the day for the economy and for the citizens and for the European project. The price of achieving this was a smaller budget, a budget that is going to turn the European Union into a less equal place and less of a union, therefore, just to buy off the four countries that like to call themselves frugals. 4 countries that do not follow the rules and have no problem with the increase in their lump sum that they are going to get back the margins of European budgetary rules, and that are on the side of the European Union system. And yet this was accepted for the sake of an agreement, for this plan that was agreed on. this is going to undermine the internal market, the rules of the internal market. For year on year, for almost 10 years, we have been seeing that there have been a transgression of macroeconomic rules, specifically when it comes to Holland. So we must understand that what is being stated clearly by the European Parliament is that the European Parliament will not accept the budget as it stands, will not accept a union that is less equal, and will not accept these rebates, checks that are sent back to some of the richest countries of the European Union. And when it comes to future debates, we know that every single political group in this Parliament is going to support just that we will not accept this type of activity or a less equal union. Thank you.
Thank you. For 1.5 minutes, Mr. Puigdemont.
Very much. The news of the agreement this week have been very positive and full of hope. At a moment of adapt and serious problems, a big step forward. This is what one would expect from the EU. Now it will be member states who must distribute resources with efficiency, with a federal mentality, and above all, with great responsibility. This money comes from the effort of millions and has been mobilised thanks to a marvellous word which is, or should be, the essence of the EU, solidarity. No one should ever forget this. A powerful economic recovery machine has been built, but the opportunity has been lost for this colossal energy to serve to strengthen democracy and the rule of law, especially in these times when dramatic situations, such as those of the Uyghur people, demand from Europe an indisruptible moral authority in the human rights field. There are states that will receive a lot of money who will not feel any obligation to change their treatment of their opposition of national minorities, as we the Catalans know well. Spain continues to spend millions on Pegasus software license to spy on pro-independence leaders. Will Spain reject the recommendation of the United Nations Human Rights Committee? Can there be economic recovery without a democratic dimension? Yes, in China, but in Europe, the slightest possibility that this might be possible is a nightmare that we should know how to shake off.
For 2 minutes, Mrs. De Lange.
Dank u wel, mevrouw de voorzitter.
Thank you very much, President. After the 4 days and nights that President Michel described, I would describe this agreement as the good, the bad and the ugly. The good thing is that we have an agreement, not only on the budget, which is always difficult, but also on the recovery package for the corona crisis and the economic consequences thereof. And let's not fool ourselves. It's not the end of the crisis. And I'll take this opportunity to say to the people outside, just because it's sunny doesn't mean that the crisis is over. Stick to the rules. We have health workers risking their lives to look after us, so this is the least we can do. So we need to look at other areas, but we need to look at other areas as well, such as border guards and migration. We keep going around in circles. The last time around, when we had a migration crisis, we said we had to work together as Europe. And now that budget's been cut. And I know that next time we have migration crisis, you're going to say we need to tackle this at a European level. And then ugly, when it comes to the rule of law. In every version of the Council conclusions, it got weaker and weaker. But not all is lost. I take the outstretched hand of the President of the Commission to continue to work on the 2018 draft. And I think if we can do that, we can send a very clear signal to the governments in Poland, Czechia and Hungary and all the other member states indeed that the Parliament will not give up on the rule of law and the respect for this. Now, why is that so important? We're adding a new element with the recovery package, but the fundamental, the basic fundamental, the basic foundation of everything is the rule of law, and we need to continue to work on the rather weak text from the Council. I'm very happy to take the outstretched hand from the President of the Commission. Thank you.
Madam Marcus.
Presidents, this time we have a European response to the crisis. The citizens, the families, businesses, civil society organizations and governments can count on a European response. This is precisely what the aspiration was. The European Parliament advocated for the establishment of a recovery fund that is based on the mutualization of debt. And the European response is based on this fund. And we'd like to congratulate the Commission for coming up with a creative approach to an ambitious and balanced MFF as well as the recovery plan that work together. The member states are, I'm sure, quite satisfied with the financial envelopes that they will receive. But there is something that everyone is concerned about, and I think the President von der Leyen also shares this concern at the European Commission. How will we be able to look at the strategic programs for the future-oriented programs, for example, Erasmus, Horizon Europe, Digital Europe, EU for Health, Creative Europe, Rights and Values? This is why the European Parliament is very pleased to see the European response, but will never let down all of the means that it has available to it to make sure that the European Union has a budget that is far more robust. That is why we are counting on the Commission, the institution that is in charge of protecting the interests of the Union, because it is the interest of the Union that is being questioned here, and it is the added value of the Europe that must be recovered. We will also count on the European leaders to move beyond their national interests throughout the course of negotiations. We also will request a midterm review that will analyze gender mainstreaming as well as climate objectives. But first and foremost, when it comes to the sources of new own resources for the European Union, for example, introducing new resources, including the digital levy or a financial transaction levy. The European Union budget that is based on a percentage of GNI that has led to many discussions over the courses of many years and that haven't always been easy. And finally, we have a budget for the future of Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. For 2 minutes, Madam Hayet.
Thank you, Madame la Présidente. Madame la Présidente.
Madam President, Mr. President, colleagues, this pandemic completely shocked us. It shocked Europeans in the light of our helplessness in the first few weeks. Our economies, our workers have been severely hit. Our responsibility as elected representatives is to give people hope that in the future we'll be better prepared to face any health crisis, however suddenly it appears. And I hope that our world of the future will be more resilient, more green, more innovative, and with more solidarity. It's with this in mind that the heads of state and government adopted this recovery plan. It's a major step forward for our future. It's a historic moment, but I don't think anyone in this hemicycle, in this chamber, will be able to contest it unless they are really of bad faith. So, Mr. President, let me congratulate you sincerely for having reached agreement on this extraordinary budget. We very strongly support it. However, the job wasn't easy at all. But honestly, it was likely to happen. The heads of state are constrained by unanimity. They bring their own national constraints to Brussels. They know that they're going to be judged by a very intransigent national lens, and that's got to stop. Mr. President, Madam President, in the position we're going to adopt today, we European parliamentarians are asking for a clear commitment for rapid introduction of new own resources. Nothing vague like maybe it is likely that. No, we're asking the GAFAs, the multinationals who engage in aggressive tax planning, and the Chinese multinationals that pollute. They have to bear the burden. This is the very raison d'etre of this recovery plan, to ensure solidarity between our countries without placing too great a burden on our citizens. Essentially, we want to put down in law what has been adopted in spirit. Our request is very much in line with the dynamics of your agreement, Mr. President. Today, we can start the discussion on this budget today, together with full confidence as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. For 1.5 minutes, Mr. Madison.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. von der Leyen, Mr. Michel, I'll speak in my own language just now. Alustuseks, et mul on väga rõõm kuulda kõikide inimeste kiidulaulu.
First of all, it's very interesting to hear everybody's elation over reaching an agreement, but my problem is the main reasons for it. Why are we borrowing jointly 750 million euros? The real reason, according to the European Commission, is that many member states would not be able to borrow at such conditions individually. Why? Because the economy isn't working for them. And why is that? Because European directives, regulations have hampered member states so much that things just aren't functioning properly. So the member states that have been frugal, conservative with their financial policies, for example, Estonia, my member state, which has one of the lowest national debts in the world, has to accept joint borrowing because many European states have been living over their limits for years. And now, for the rule of law, we cannot bypass the treaties because the treaties would not allow this president for the European Commission to borrow on a European level. And we don't know how we will finance these repayments. And I'm sure that all of this will end up in European courts, which is what happened in Germany, and I sure hope that we will find a European future.
For 1 minute, Mr. Eickhout.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would like to use my minute to really address the frugals, the 5 frugals in your council, where all our political families have our issues, and I think we have to be fair on that. But the questions to the frugals would be, what were you thinking? 10 years after a euro crisis, when there is finally a momentum for a public investment plan, let's cut it. A health crisis hitting Europe everywhere, let's cut the EU for Health programme. A 7-year EU budget investing in our next decade, let's cut the budget for research. The next big crisis being climate change, let's cut Just Transition Fund. The European values being challenged everywhere. Let's kick the rule of law can down the road again. Yes, dear frugals, you have your rebates, but we are discussing the future of Europe here, and that is in everyone's interest, certainly in yours. We as a European Parliament are offering you this summer to rethink your priorities.
Thank you. For 1.5 minutes, Mr. Johnza.
Dziękuję bardzo, pani. Thank you very much, Madam President. The multi-annual financial framework and the new fund are needed. No matter what we say today, I want to believe that what has been prepared by the Council after the long negotiations with important participation of Poland as well is something that must be appreciated, and that's something I wanted to stress. That I can see that the idea of solidarity and responsibility has won over national egoism, something we feared. No one gets hurt with what is being proposed now. I believe deeply that using rule of law as an excuse. It's something that is clearly visible. Both Poland and Hungary and all other member states are in favor of rule of law. We are all in favor of clean air, clean water, good climate. And I hope that we don't arrive at a situation where, based on false pretext that, for example, a given judge is not feeling very well and a nation is being sanctioned or a country is being sanctioned for it. I believe that you remain honest, that Madam von der Leyen remains honest on the subject. If we are to review mechanisms in member states, then it must be reliable. We are not afraid of rule of law. We fear bad judges. I also hope that very quickly the money will be released into the economy so that it will be actually used in poorer regions by entrepreneurs, by people who need help at work, who need protection. I believe that we will introduce the new instruments. Yes, there are shortages, there are problems, but I hope we will really move forward, and let's hope that the money is used well in all member states. Thank you very much.
Thank you. 1 minute, Mr. Omarjee.
Madame la Présidente, merci.
President, thank you very much. I'm hearing that this is a historical agreement, but we know from experience and from our own lucidity that sometimes doors which have been opened slam again once we start talking about competition. But we'll see that in the future. Something which is historical is only historical for a brief moment. And the agreement reached in the Council was achieved at the cost of cuts in the policies for the future, the Green Deal, Erasmus, research, development. And there's also a very worrying trend towards renationalisation of European policies. And I think that this agreement shows that national interests have taken precedence over the European interests that we defend. I would like to say to the Council that the European Parliament has the final say. We're in co-decision on the agreement, and we're the guarantors of the community method. Thank you.
Thank you. 1 minute, Madam Adinolfi.
Thank you, President. Dear colleagues, on the 21st of July, the Europe of Solidarity was born. This date will go down in history, I do believe, as a new era, with 750 billion euros that will be earmarked to fight the economic crisis, including the issuance of joint debt, and thereby planted the seed of a Europe of the future. Soon, we will begin to harvest the fruit, and we will be generous. And we will distribute them even to those who thought that they would just harvest the rubble like the Salvernists from Italy and elsewhere. Of course, there's much that remains to be done. The European Parliament will begin to improve the agreement, and some of those cuts were short-sighted and make no sense. How could we cut health programs in the middle of a health emergency? Then we are going to have to defend the investments to the south of Europe, relaunch the tourist industry, as well as assist the cultural sector that have been so hard hit by the pandemic. We are extremely proud of this big change, and this is a great path that we are beginning to follow. It's the dream of Spinelli and the founders. We are not at all afraid, and we will go forward. The future is waiting for us. Thank you.
Thank you. 2 minutes, Mr. Kaspari.
Madam President, congratulations to the European Council for this rapid agreement. This is a strong signal. It's a signal that Europe is marching on, that Europe might be made up of different interests, but ultimately the member states are able to rapidly find a common position. And this is an important message to the citizens. They can rely on us. We show solidarity, and we're tackling the challenges together. So this paper is a very good basis for negotiation. However, we cannot simply agree to it as it is. Now, the money is to flow as of the 1st of January, so we have a little bit of time to agree on certain improvements. However, we have some topics that have to be discussed. Have we done enough to make sure that the money goes into sensible investments rather than simply fresh money going into something that doesn't help? Now, why weren't the member states courageous and steering towards European projects, for example, structural funds? Why have the member states insisted on presenting their own programmes rather than we acting together in European programmes? My second question to you, President of the Council, how can we ensure that it isn't just a 1% of European money that is going to be paid as a percentage of GNP in the next few years, and it might come up to 3 or 4%. How can we ensure then that the 49% of GNP that is spent by the member states at national, regional, local level, that is spent as well as possible? Now, we can only have an effective European project if the member states adopt the right measures with their 49% in the coming weeks and months. We have to give that message from the European Parliament that we have high expectations from the governments in the member states. Thank you.
Thank you. For 1.5 minutes, Mr. Vulcan.
Sehr geehrte Frau Präsidentin, sehr geehrte
President, Mr. Michel, Ms. von der Leyen, it's very good that you've come out of the negotiations with the result. However, what's in the compromise is not good. The bitter pill that you mentioned today that we're supposed to swallow is not one that we're prepared to swallow. You're cutting funds where funds are essential for the future of the European Union. The Invest Europe program, which is supposed to be for the investments in the green, we've cut 40 to 17.5, and you cut health spending to just 240 million per year in the middle of a pandemic. Now, the recovery program is Next Generation EU. It sounds like Next Generation EU means that digitization, health, and the climate crisis is something that the next generation will have to deal with, not us, and that's not acceptable. To avoid the citizens being disgusted by this, we have to make sure that we have a voice in recovery. And the rule of law, the draft is completely unacceptable on this. Rule of law is the basis for cooperation, and it is the protection for our cooperation, and that's why the pill is so bitter. We will continue to fight so that until such a time as we have sufficient rule of law in there to make sure that journalists, citizens and everybody else can sleep safely.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Madam von der Leyen, Mr. Michel, colleagues. It is good that we have a result from the summit. However, I think that the weekend also showed that the member states see the European Union just as a cash machine. The idea is to pay in as little as possible and get out as much as possible. And that's all the member states. Obviously, the frugals want to pay in as little as possible. The others want to get out as much as possible. Colleagues, the European Union is not a cash machine. It has to be some kind of insurance for the future. And therefore, we have to have a future-oriented programme with Erasmus, with education, with research, with true European projects. For example, a hydrogen union. Now, the EU has to be strong where the member states are not strong. Colleagues, some member states see this EU as a cash dispenser, in that they think that they can line their pockets together with their friends from the EU. That's wrong. We've got to change that. We've got to have a protection for the rule of law in Europe, so that we can guarantee that the money is no longer going to go to would-be autocrats or corrupt leaders who want the money to go to their friends. Merkel and co. unfortunately let Orban have the upper hand at this summit, and we will not accept that.
Thank you. 1.5 minutes, Mr. Beck.
Good news first. Brexit has saved Britain €80 billion net, roughly the sum the recovery fund would have cost Britain. Never let a good crisis go to waste. Daher gibt die...
And yet the EU is incurring 750 billion through debts and spending 1.8 trillion euros. It's a coup d'etat. Article 310 and 311 of the TFEU says that the EU budget shall be in balance and shall be financed wholly from own resources. These are clear words. However, the EU is incurring debt and it's illegal. Confucius said, where words lose their meaning, people lose their freedom. Not in Hungary or Poland, but because of Brussels and Berlin. Merkel is acting as if Germany today is a superpower like the USA after the war and is imposing German taxpayer money on others, as it were. And yet Germany has the lowest private wealth of the Eurozone, the highest taxes in the world, record energy prices and the lowest rate of property ownership. Rich Germany has very poor citizens. Von der Leyen is planning EU taxes and is taking on EU debt illegally. Christine Lagarde is printing illegal trillions of euro. 3 women are managing the EU. That's no problem. However, they're the most expensive women in Europe since Madame de Pompadour.
Madame de Sutter, for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, President. Mrs. President, President Michel. Yes, the agreement is historical. Of course, we acknowledge that. But as a doctor, I must say I'm disappointed because of the cuts in the health programme. We're in the middle of the crisis. We are at the beginning of a second wave. We all see the figures rising again in Europe. I cannot understand, I cannot explain to my colleagues why the member states did not understand this as an absolute priority. And we cannot compare the figures in the proposal now with previous figures because we did not have a COVID crisis then. I'm also a researcher and a professor. I cannot explain my students why Erasmus has received cuts. I cannot explain to my fellow researchers why Horizon EU is not what it should be, because we need that also for innovation, for startups, for SMEs, for our power, our leadership role in the world. We've believed the ambition of the Commission in respect of the Green Deal and the digital transition. And these are the priorities that are aimed to the future that we are missing in this proposal. So please, if we negotiate the MFF, listen to us and top up these essential programmes. Thank you.
Thank you. 1 minute, Mr. Epping.
Mevrouw de voorzitter, de Europese top.
President, the end of the council was that Mark Rutte threw in the towel. And what is the result? We end up in trouble without the UK. We're going to have European debt, which Mr. Rutte was always against. And he talked about the emergency brake procedure, but that's a farce. There isn't a plug that you can pull. So the Netherlands is just throwing in the towel. The Dutch pensions are going to be cut back. That's very bitter for people, and people don't understand it. And therefore, I would call for a referendum in the Netherlands on this redistribution plan where we're cutting Dutch pensions in order to beef up pensions in other countries. Let people vote.
Mrs. Daly.
And as you know, yesterday Dr. Saeed Ali, a frontline healthcare worker, died in Dublin's Mater Hospital a day before his 60th birthday, one of the many casualties to this health crisis. And I have to say, sitting here, I'm really struck by the shocking disconnect between the words spoken and the deal before us and the reality for his family and for the citizens of Europe. We have been through an unprecedented health crisis. We're still in it. In May, the Commission told us you needed 9.4 billion for a new standalone health programme, the first instalment of a necessary 70 billion programme. Instead, we get nothing for health in the recovery and 1.7 billion in the MFF, while a 13.5 billion goes on our defence budgets. What an insult to Dr. Ali. We talk about solidarity, but your conditions on your form sound very much like austerity to me, with no such conditions on rule of law. I'm sorry, but it is a monument to European hypocrisy.
For 1.5 minutes, Madam Ponziati Obiols.
Thank you, Mr. President. Madam President, sorry. I welcome the agreement of the Council. European citizens need the recovery fund to get back on their feet and face the future with hope. But to boost back our economies, we need more than hard work and money. We need to boost all our creative potential, and that means good government, rule of law, science and technology. That's why it's so disturbing that the Council has used science as the cash cow for the negotiations. COVID makes the value of research more evident than ever, but 27 prime ministers failed to realise that. So I call on this Parliament to stand up for the science budget. Council overruled the rule of law and science, but I am glad they agreed on a control mechanism so that recovery funds are used productively. Spain will be a major recipient, and this money needs to be put to good use. And yes, this requires external control, because Spain is the member state where the royal house is the centre of a massive corruption scheme, but government and parliament refuse to investigate. Spain is the country that spends billions in submarines that cannot feed the docks, or airports where planes never fly. Spain is the champion of high-speed trains, while commuter transit remains dangerously underinvested. Spain is the country that bailed out the banks, not the people, and never asked banks any money back. So I'm glad someone will be looking closely how these funds are spent. Thank you very much.
For 2 minutes, Mr. Halicki.
Szanowna Pani Przewodnicząca.
Madam President, congratulations, Mr. Michel. Indeed, the summit has finished in success. It's a historical moment where such huge amounts of money, potentially, I hope that the ratification process will go smoothly, that such amounts can reignite a European economy after the crisis of COVID-19. What is also very important, European funds will be protected by the rule of law mechanism. That is a success in itself. But here in Parliament, we will soon vote on the budget, on the MMF, which is to implement our objectives. How can you sign cuts in the Just Transformation funds with one hand, because the Just Transformation Fund was to achieve climate neutrality in 2050, and yet you say it's our priority. The coal regions, such as Silesia in Poland, they need support. We must reinforce the fund rather than cut it. We cannot tell to young people in our member states that Europe is thinking about you, your future, your education, and then you turn around and cut Erasmus Plus by 50%, which is one of the main programs for modern Europe and chances for the young generation. Starting in September, we will have a committee set up in Parliament to fight against cancer, the biggest plague in Europe, yet another challenge concerning health next to the COVID problem. But we have deleted health policy from financial planning. We cannot agree to this in Parliament. We have been talking a lot about the rule of law. If rule of law is so important to all of us, then the right and values program, which was to promote common values and democracy, then it should be reinforced. And also financial support under the program should be reinforced. Also, border protection, science, and so on and so forth. We have to be stronger. We have to show more solidarity. I think we'll arrive at these objectives also financially. We need to readjust the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. 1.5 minutes, Madam Gardiazabal Rubial.
Thank you, President. President von der Leyen, President Michel, European Councils usually are cause for great expectation and often frustration, but this time that wasn't the case, and I'd like to congratulate you for that. You have carried out excellent work, and you have been able to achieve an historic agreement. And in fact, you did what needed to be done, the qualitative leap that was needed for European construction. That Monet said that Europe was built out of crises. We have seen that the number is lower than we wanted, but we know that it is crucial. What is not enough, however, is the MFF. There's no mistake about that. It cannot be for the third time that we're going to go back to a budget and approve that that is lower than the 7-year period previous to this one, because every single time we know that the challenges are greater each subsequent period, and specifically with the crisis and the coronavirus. And that's why we need the recovery fund, of course. But we knew that even before that we had a great need, and we needed to fund that. We have to continue to invest, have research for cancer, and to support industrial projects, more efficient modes of transport, to assist those who are unemployed with training, and to help young people get to the job market, to also assist the children. And that is why we need a strong budget. It is sad that this European spirit that was really the guiding light of the summit was not able to be fully fleshed out in this sense. But now let's look at the expenditure. Now we know that we can find an agreement, of course, an agreement that will be absolutely perfect. I'm sure of that indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. 1.5 minutes. Mr. Verhofstadt.
I have to tell you that we were with a few lonely rangers that, since the outbreak from the financial crisis, started to say that Eurobonds and new own resources were needed. And everybody said, impossible, unrealistic, a dream that will never happen. This is Europe. Well, it happens. And so I'm pleased with the outcome of this summit. And I think it's historic, yeah? It's historic. The first leap forward was the internal market. The second leap forward was the euro. The third leap forward is the fact that Europe will issue bonds for the first time and will increase his fiscal capacity in a dramatic way. So I'm pleased, and this is historic. But there are also weaknesses in this plan. Let's be honest. And the most important weakness is due to what? The rule of unanimity. And that's the reason why the pan-European projects have been cut, and that the direct transfers to the member states and the rebates for the frugals are still there. And I think that I will be very blunt here in this House. And I think that I'm speaking for the whole House. I don't see that this House will give his green light for this package and for the MFF if this is not rectified. If we again have not these pan-European projects as the priority in the MFF. And it's easy to do. The easy way to do is to start with his own resources earlier than foreseen in the plan. In the plan, it's foreseen in 2023. My proposal is to start in 2021. And finally, my last point, Mr. President, before you use your weapon again against me, like every time, that is that there needs to be co-decision by the Parliament. We're going to spend and collect 750 billion euro. That is only possible with democratic control. We are in Europe, we are not in China or in Russia.
Thank you. It was a good job, Mr. Verhofstadt, that I didn't cut you off. So the holidays are coming. Our next speaker for 1.5 minutes is Mr. Meyer.
Thank you very much, Madam President. We are living in very extraordinary times. I think we're all aware of that. And obviously extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. And there's a lot at stake with this financial package. It's one with 12 figures behind it. We're talking about an awful lot. This package, these decisions are going to influence forthcoming generations and also the politics in many generations. However, after this summit, it's very strange. Everyone seems like a winner. Merkel, Kurz, Macron announced victory after the negotiations, victory for their states. Nevertheless, anyone who's been in a negotiation knows that simply isn't possible. Not everyone can leave a negotiation as a winner. And there are some people who are even saying that Germany and France ultimately will be the ones who most benefit from these measures because the criteria have been changed, because we're talking about larger amounts. And yet it's strange that everyone claimed to be a winner. But obviously there was a lot of haggling, and behind all of this is what we don't want. There's a debt union. We've got to look very closely at this. And then the rule of law. Rule of law cannot only apply for others, it also has to apply to ourselves, dear colleagues. And something else was clear from this summit is that we are seeing blocks here, north, south, east, west. But for a supposed union based on solidarity, that is detrimental. Colleagues, solidarity can never just be a one-way street.
For 1 minute, Madam Hahn.
It's good that we now have a negotiating position on this EU summit, and it's a strong signal that we're picking ourselves up in Europe and getting on with things, but negotiations are just starting. We can't accept cuts in future-oriented programs such as health and research and climate. We promised to save the earth with a climate-neutral Europe by 2050. We need strong research to decarbonize, and SMEs need support. Fossil energy is not something we can use. Horizon, Invest Europe, and so on are future-oriented programs. We can't accept these cuts. We promised to stand by people with a just transition program. A lot of regions were already developing their programs. We're now just abandoning that. It's not on. We need to have a fair transition, and we need to have all our programs up and running for that. Thank you.
Mr. Lundgren.
Tack för ordet.
Thank you very much. Let me start by saying that this Council package is contrary to Articles 300 and 311 in the treaty. There it says that the EU cannot borrow money for its budget, and it's up to MEPs to ensure that the rules are complied with, rather than just ignoring rules that we have in the treaty. We have a situation in Sweden where people are dying, where at the same time Prime Minister is sending money abroad. We've 6 billion more in money that we're submitting to the EU now. How that is a rebate, I don't understand. And now we're talking about EU taxation and own resources. You sold out Sweden, you sold out the Swedes, and I hope that your voters will reflect this in the future.
Dank u wel, mevrouw de president, mevrouw Ursula von der Leyen, meneer Charles.
Thank you very much. For the first time, the European Union is going to borrow money as a union to make this available to those countries that require it, and to stop a gap. That's a step in the right direction. And it's a good example to those countries who are not showing solidarity at all. But I also want to put you on your guard, because you've come up with this avatar of European solidarity in the European semester. And this European semester has permitted the Commission to advise countries 63 times to cut in their health spending. If you're going to use this to impose a social measures, that's not acceptable. If you're going to do this to the detriment of our workers, we will be in your way. Thank you.
Thank you. 1 minute. Mr. Castaldo.
Grazie.
Thank you, President and colleagues. The Council brought forth an historic agreement that moves forcefully beyond the problems of tomorrow, but we don't know what the future holds. And it is difficult to understand what has been decided. We know that we have Next Gen EU, 750 billion to move beyond the mistakes of austerity. And we are so pleased to see that Conte has been able to make sure that they would avoid the major decreases of the frugals. But we know that it is this Parliament that is going to decide, and it is not going to be an anachronistic intergovernmental system that will decide. And we know that we need more than 750 billion. The programs, future-oriented ones, for example, Erasmus Plus and Horizon, they would not have been multilated. And then there would be a carbon tax already in 2021, and then the richest Europeans would not have been able to get away from a tax. And then with the rebates. As a Parliament, we are prepared to fight. You can bet on that. And that is why the Conference of the Future of the Europe should lead to treaty change. Council with unanimity will not be able to vanquish Europe.
Thank you. For 2 minutes, Mr. Sire. Micro, please.
Sokat beszélnek ebben a házban a jogállamiságról olyanok is, akiknek halvány fog.
Well, there's a lot of talk about rule of law. People are talking about it and they don't even know what it means. The rule of the law for me is freedom, democracy, equality. It's about the prevalence of law. But my people 30 years ago fought to make sure that it shouldn't just be a privilege for Western Europe, which you've inherited. We fought for it, but let me say to you that what is not rule of law, it's not about not abiding by rules that are not actually written down. It means not operating with different weights and measures, that you praise some for the same thing and criticise others, that you sanction certain types of ideology. But people here are exploiting this for party political means. When you talk about rule of law, you should not change the voting rights so that you create what you want. For example, the votes in the Sargentini report. But you shouldn't fear other opinions. The person who is accused should have the right to react. A few weeks ago, you said no to allowing the Prime Minister in Hungary answering. Now, without a law, you can't have a sanction. But here, there's not going to be any agreements through this House that does not base itself on legal criteria. Here, in the case of any suspicion, then, of course, sanctions can be considered. But what we're having here is a thought police. It's a communist way of approaching this. It's the Soviet method where the law is being used to oppress others. Now, we know what you're doing. We've been victim of similar oppression. We've overcome it, and we're not going to allow it to be brought in through the back door. Europe deserves rule of law.
First, like to lecture certain countries to certain politicians about observing rules in the name of rule of law. However, this Parliament is in this breach in itself in this moment for its own rules of procedure 182 and 187, which clearly say that voting can start only after the debate on the floor finished. We are debating still, but the voting has already started. This is a violation of our own values. So let's sweep in front of our own house first before we condemn others. Thank you very much.
Just for the record, Mr. Sire, the final vote takes place after the debate. I move now to the next speaker, Mr. Fernandes, for 1.5 minutes.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, President. First and foremost, it's important to recognize the fact that the agreement at the Council, the European Council, is an historic step forward. It is transcendent in the European construction process. It is an agreement that gives continuity to the request that was made by the European Parliament in our resolution in May, where we were requesting a financial instrument via community debt and more own resources to assist the European economy in the face of this crisis. This is a key step. And the government, led by Pedro Sanchez's government, has played a key role in this. Now, one of the things that we do need to question is as follows. First and foremost, the budget itself. And there are some places where there is not a growth in the earmarks. For example, the Just Transition Fund in my region, Asturias, where we see a major challenge. It's transcendent as well, and we need solid European assistance there too. Also, when it comes to resilience and recovery, that facility aims to assist countries to put into place the reforms, and that there is an agreement in Council on that, and the Parliament does not have a say. We need to make sure that there is democratic legitimacy to the governance, so that the citizens can see that their interests are being presented and represented, and the European Parliament will have its say in that, and we will do that in discussions with the Council. Thank you.
Thank you. 1.5 minutes, Mr. Séjourné.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, President. Mr. President. Madam President, this is a historical time, which everybody has said. It's perhaps not your history, Mr. Joubert, but it's ours. And this shows the extraordinary impetus which has allowed us to come up with the recovery fund. We have to look at where we were a couple of weeks ago, when people were saying it was impossible to get this agreement, and some people had entered a veto on the very idea of a recovery plan, a veto on transfer, a veto on common debt. Now we've actually got it, and I think we should salute that. This resolution obviously, what's difficult is that we have to hail this agreement while at the same time saying something about the demands of the people of Europe. We're the 28th voice in this negotiation, and we're proposing legitimate amendments, more Erasmus, more health, and particularly more rapid action to repay our common debt, more measures to do that. 4 days of discussions among the heads of state and government was the price of democracy, and I agree with that. Nowhere else in this world can 27 leaders come up with such an ambitious plan within 4 days. But let's not forget that this budget is also the price of democracy. We're not going to block, but we will be there when history is written. Thank you.
For 1.5 minutes, Mr. Van den Driessen.
Voorzitter, collega's, 13 miljard.
13 billion euro. That's how much you have to contribute net to the recovery fund for COVID. We have more than €1 billion every year. We have a shortfall of 50 billion in Belgium. How can we explain to our citizens that there's no money for decent pensions, no money for thousands of families who are on the very edge of the abyss, but loads of money for the Santa Claus of the EU? The more money the Eurocrats get in their hands, the more power they have, and the more control they'll be able to exercise over citizens. They're creating dependency without people having ever chosen for that. After 50 years, these Euro fanatics are losing all referendums. to avoid more countries choosing to take that independence, they're now coming up with a European tax and European debt, and this way they're creating a fiscal prison that nobody can get out of. This Europe is something that we have never chosen. Thank you.
For 1 minute, Madam Metz.
Sehr geehrte Präsidentin.
President, in this House, there is a clear majority for more solidarity, for more transparency, for more sustainability, for more Europe. It is not about which country has got what or how much. No, my question is in what we're going to invest. Saving the economy should not be done to the detriment of future-oriented programmes. How can we speak of next generation, for example, and yet cut expenditure for education? How can we want to implement a Green Deal and cut the budget by half for the Just Transition Fund? How can governments in the middle of a pandemic cut the planned expenditure for health and research? And what of our hopes for a more sustainable common agricultural policy when the planned subsidy for rural development is being halved? These cuts cannot be supported by this Parliament because we cannot repair during a recovery. Thank you.
Thank you. 1 minute, Mr. Fidanza.
Thank you, President. Now, rhetoric aside, we have seen that it just took a few hours to understand that the 21st of July agreement wasn't the best agreement possible. And in fact, it can be said in the resolution, the exact same that have given a standing ovation to the heads of state and government, as happened with Conte yesterday in Parliament in Italy. But what we can see is that the response is too little too late. And what we can see that it is a problem with the rebates, national rebates, and that the fact that the grants was far too low, that the money is going to get there far too late when many companies have already closed up shop. This would just be, is supposed to be a bridge for helping them immediately. And then there was the governance with a conditionality that is going to prevent us from making our own free choices for our governance. And then when it comes to the taxation of the Chinese or the digital sector, that has been kicked down the field for several months, and the plastic levy as well. We were right, well, and you wrote it yourselves in your motion for resolution.
For 2 minutes, Madam Estaras Farragut.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to express support and condolences to those families who have lost victims that will always be in our memory, and all the workers who have been fighting against the pandemic. The agreement is positive. It is a step forward. We mustn't waste time because time is pressing and we're late. We have to act boldly, rapidly. It's a plan of solidarity and cohesion for Europe. It's a historic agreement because never have all member states taken joint debt because of its magnitude, and it's also a step forward in European integration. The aims are very clear: to give more jobs, to safeguard lives, to rebuild Europe. The leadership of Merkel and the leadership of von der Leyen was very clear, both EPP women. This plan requires the member states to show responsibility and stability, and at the same time come forward with ambitious, solid reform programmes. To all the member states, now, in the past, under Rajoy, we did this in Spain and achieved good results. Now, Europe has done its bit, now the member states have to. And Spain has to listen to this. The general interest has to prevail over power balance. Of course, we have to control the money to make sure it's spent where it's most needed. The second part of the agreement, the MFF, is not satisfactory. We do not agree with the cuts that are unjustified, unjustifiable. 10% of the cuts to the common agricultural policy is absolutely unwarranted. The rural areas cannot be the ones who pay the price for this negotiation. We've seen, after all, how well it has performed during the pandemic. The same to the cuts in the Just Transition Fund, health, education, Erasmus. All of this undermines the future of Europe. And ultimately, let me say, I'm very concerned about the rule of law. We need mechanisms that guarantee a defence of our rule of law. Without the rule of law, there's no democracy. But without democracy, there's no Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Madam Piri, for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. And let me start off positively. So let me first congratulate President Michel and President von der Leyen with what has been achieved on the Recovery Fund. I think a large majority in this Parliament agrees that it was innovative. It is what the people need right now who are afraid to lose their jobs. So congratulations for that. It's forward-looking. This is where the praise stops, though, because I do believe that with the MFF, it's not a budget that is a budget for the challenges we are facing as Europe right now. It's a budget which lacks ambition. It lacks modernity. And President von der Leyen, you can't be satisfied with this as European Commission. Let me just give you one example. When this crisis is leading to a global inequality, what do? We cut the money for development aid. And colleagues, the most important point, because on money we can negotiate, but we can't negotiate on our values. And the fact in itself that we have law professors, we have EU leaders, we have journalists who are all having different interpretation about what the European Council has agreed on when it comes to the rule of law is a bad signal. I hear some people saying it's very good that for the first time we mentioned the rule of law and the budget together. This is not something to be proud of. This we didn't need 15 years ago. Now we have 2 countries in the European Union who, according to Freedom House, are a hybrid regime and no longer in the group of democracies. So please, for my party, for my group, and I hope for a majority in this Parliament, we have to have clear wording on rule of law before we can agree to this budget. It's not about money, it's about principles.
Thank you. Madam Cech, for 1 minute.
The editor-in-chief of Hungary's largest independent news portal, Index, was fired yesterday, a few hours after Mr. Orban proclaimed his victory over Brussels. President von der Leyen, President Michel, empty words without action only serve to embolden the populists. This budget is our historic chance to rebuild and renew Europe, and I'm very glad we have this deal. But make no mistake, this deal is what we make of it. It can strengthen Europe, or it can help the anti-European populists. Because for yet again, the Council failed to deliver a strong rule of law mechanism, a clear link between EU values and EU money. And Parliament's call should be clear. No more empty promises on values. No more uncontrolled funds of flows of EU money to the pockets of corrupted oligarchs, but direct funds to local communities who need them now more than ever before. We ask the Commission to take action and take leadership on these commitments. And we ask the German presidency to live up to Chancellor Merkel's promises and treat rule of law as a top priority. Anything less than concrete actions is unacceptable for us.
Madame Laporte, 1.5 minutes.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, President. The 4 days and nights of negotiations were no honour for Europe because Europe has ended as divided as ever. People were just fed up, and that's why there was an agreement, but it's a failure for Europe. It's a failure in terms of credibility of the project, and Emmanuel Macron said that the taxpayer would not be paying anything for the relaunch, but who could even believe that? We're actually walking on water with Europe. How are we supposed to repay a debt with non-existent own resources? It would have to come from the member state. It's contrary to Article 300 of TFEU. It's a budgetary approach which is not accepted. And no doubt we'll end up with a European Treasury and consolidation of debt. And then when it comes to priorities, how can we simply take away EU for Health program when we're actually talking about a health crisis? COVID is something which crosses borders and no lessons have been learned. How can we justify that we continue to give rebates when UK should have actually sounded the death knell of this system? We need to start a debate on subsidiarity. Why would a European plan be more effective than a number of national plans? This is a trompe-l'oeil which actually hides the fact that Europe is moribund. Thank you.
For 1 minute, Mr. Corman.
Merci, mesdames.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are relieved. We've avoided the worst, a no-deal situation that would have only made the crisis that we are currently undergoing much worse. But like many pro-Europeans, I'm feeling a little bit still upset because we've seen national selfishness and there is the free competition amongst the member states, and we've seen that there are problems with the budget. We see that the lack of own resources mean that there's going to be no real ability to act, and the recovery fund actually hurts our conceptualization of democracy. Now, we know that the climate challenges are great, and we have reason to believe that there's going to be a total disappearance of that in the recovery plan, a plan that seems like a traditional one. Now, we've been told that this was an urgent measure, but if we find ourselves that if we have our back to the wall, and for too long we've had these choices that have been made that have been to the detriment to the future. Now, Europe of small steps forward, and we've seen that is setting the groundwork for a huge leap backwards that will actually sap the future of Europe. Now, this is the very first voice of Europe, not the second. We are the representatives of the people, and we should listen to the voice of the European Parliament. It is time.
1 minute, Mr. Jambaski.
Madam President, President of the Council, Madam President of the Commission, we are not going to support the MFF nor the recovery plan because they contradict the provisions of the treaty. You wish to be the partisans of the rule of law, but you're accepting these proposals. You are taking on debt from our children. You're borrowing from them, but you haven't asked their opinion. They're the ones who are going to pay the price. You have distributed this loan, but also subsidies, grants. This way you're acting is communism, quite frankly, and we can see where communism leads. What of the rule of law? The rule of law is an independent judiciary. Do not try to change society. Do not try to change the law of families. Madam van der Leyen, President of the Council, you are not drawing conclusions from the past. You are building a socialist Europe that has no future.
Madame la Présidente.
President, the European Parliament does not accept this agreement. These are the energetic words of Article 3 that we're going to be voting on today. The solidarity of member states was expected faced with this historical crisis, but this recovery plan is a collection of bad responses. Collective debt. We're being told it's a historical moment. We're coming out of this pandemic with all its grief, and we should not be rejoicing. Nobody should be entitled to make this tragedy an opportunity to nurture illusions that our populations have already said no to several times. How will they feel when they're told that this recovery plan is actually pseudo-federalism, which they have not agreed to? Our people can, the fact that they can have access to the market comes at a price, when future generations will have to repay a debt which has been contracted in their name without anybody knowing how we're going to repay it. Food autonomy has never been so important. We got 40 million less in CAP. The defense fund is halved. The ecology fund goes from 30 to 10 billion. And we go down 13 million in research at a time when the pandemic has shown how weak we are. So instead of crying victory because we've come up with a debt, we should have revised profoundly the European policies so that we can reconstruct our industries, so we can finally get rid of the carbon tax, which nobody can really get to work. We come up with something that's really efficient. Thus and only thus can we have a real European recovery, and this is what the European Parliament should be striving for today. Thank you.
Thank you. 1.5 minutes, Mr. Belka.
Ladies and gentlemen, Madam President of the Commission, Mr. President of the Council. Today we are talking about how to react on the challenges of today, the pandemic, and on the challenges of the future, own resources and taxes, but much more, and issues much more important, which are nevertheless crucial for our existence. And what I mean here is values that should bind us. In my country, Poland, the rule of law respect is under the heated debate. The government keeps saying that any link between rule of law, respecting rule of law, and EU funds is just very weak and it will never be implemented. This link between respect for the rule of law and EU funds, which has been established by the EU with the qualified majority, will have to be later validated by the European Council, where Poland, faced with the rule of unanimity, is going to veto the whole thing. So Poland is going to protect its sovereignty. It might sound ironic, but it will be presented as a success at home. So, Madam President, is this narrative correct? Or is it maybe due to a misunderstanding of the conclusions? Or is it maybe just a pure lie? We have to give a clear answer to this question to our Polish citizens, but also to all the European citizens, I think. Thank you.
For 1 minute.
Madam President, Charles Michel, a Europe that inspires, that doesn't place a burden on people, needs an ambitious budget that reflects our ambitious priorities. But unfortunately, that has lost ground to national interests, so we have to make improvements. Europe of technological leadership, Europe as a true geopolitical player, have only received pennies, whereas agriculture has got far more. So why are we focusing on ownership? Where's the ambitious desire for reforms? Where's the forward-looking approach? What about jobs, education, wealth? No, ladies and gentlemen, we've got our work cut out. We've got to make some improvements. Now, obviously, we cannot achieve that by simply pumping out further money. That is not sustainable. So the new relationship between grants and loans is the right signal. And to Mr. Lambert's criticism, there were governments with Greens in government who allowed for this. More repayment, fewer gifts. More repayments, dear colleague. This is a signal for clever investment combined with reforms. That's what Europe needs, more reforms, if it wants this one-off answer to this historic crisis by taking on common debt.
1.5 minutes, Mr. Rinaldi.
Thank you, President. Italy, over the course of the last 20 years, has been a net contributor to the European Union for about 160 billion. Specifically, if we were to look at the math without any capitalization, including the direct contributions and indirect contributions to support those countries that were struggling financially through the ESM, for example. Now, if we look at this clearly and not just using blue contact lenses to look at this, we can see that Italy, throughout the entire Next Generation EU program, including all of the awful programs with the compensations through the rebates, will continue to be a net contributor, even at the cost of tasks fiscally, socially massacring companies and people, those who have been working so hard for the country. So we're looking at enormous advantages for Italy. That is what has been said. But if we look that there has been a net import, and there have been companies that have been somewhat of a tax haven, and they should perhaps look at the numbers more carefully before they speak poorly of my country. President von der Leyen, if a country is going to default on its debt, who exactly is going to pay that, the debt as issued by the Next Generation EU program? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gherkin for 1 minute.
Ja, also ich habe am Wochenende, wie viele von Ihnen,
during the weekend, like many of you, I followed the summit. I was quite shocked. And I wondered whether the leaders hadn't realized that nation states in the 21st century will never be able to manage the crisis or have any weight in the global economy. The compromise that was reached had some positives and some negatives, and substantial parts of it, as we've heard today, have been taken out. Europe must be for people, and therefore we must maintain these programs that have been taken out. I'm wondering whether the governments have not heard the voter. Have you not heard the applause that we have for the health workers? Where is there something for them, for their families? I see nothing. We've got to sort this out. We owe that to the citizens of Europe. Otherwise, we're heading in a direction that we don't want to go. Everybody must feel that Europe is good for us, and we must strengthen the support for these families.
Michel. Thank you. President Michel has asked to speak now because he's going to have to speak. Go ahead, sir.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. Thank you for your different interventions. Once again, I'd like to thank the whole of the Parliament for the driving force and the vision that you've shown in the last months. Also, thanks to the Commission for the strong cooperation. Let me just react briefly to some of the points that have been addressed. First of all, I'd like to draw attention to something that many of you have raised. In other words, the determination this time to act quickly and to act decisively. We remember a financial crisis which showed what happened if we were too slow and did too little, that the bill ultimately was too high. And the choices made within a few weeks by the Commission were to convince 27 member states, 27 political leaders, all who wish to go forward. So we've decided to move forward quickly. It's a Copernicus-like revolution of the EU project that we have now on the table, the MFF and the Recovery Fund to tackle COVID-19. This is going to thoroughly transform the way in which the EU in the future will be able to close ranks. Of course, the debate on the own resources is an old debate. It's not new. It's an old political debate. But this time, we've seen a major step forward. And I'm delighted that we'll be able to continue with the European Parliament, the national parliaments, the Council and the European Council. And the Commission will continue to be highly engaged. You've talked about these taxes, the carbon border tax, digital tax, financial tax. Of course, These are democratic debates that need to be had, that mobilise the citizens. The millions of citizens need to feel that they are participants here. They've got to be democratically involved. Let me say that what has happened now, of course, is not the end of the story, but rather the start. There's a lot of work ahead of us, a lot of mobilisation, a lot of energy that will be needed so that we can transform what is an agreement on paper by the European Council, which will give rise, I'm sure, to very intense discussions with the European Parliament. We've got to translate that into real life. And I've said it to the President of the Commission, it's not just about money, but it's about values, principles, and the steer that we want to give to this European project that we all mobilised by. It's unique. It's hitherto unknown in the world. 450 million people, different languages, different traditions, wishing to move forward together. We want a greater degree of humanity, shared humanity, and I think this is what I've heard today. Now, I've heard about the excesses. I've heard some rather miserable words from the extremist parties. Now, you're choosing to be inward-looking. You're choosing hatred. You're choosing separation, rejection. We want tolerance, openness. We want to act together. It's a very sad day for you, but it is a happy day for Europe and for Europeans.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Thank you also for your participation today in this extraordinary plenary. Let us continue with our speakers. Mr. Rangel, you have the floor. 1.5 minutes.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President.
Let me start to say eyes to eyes to President Michel that I congratulate the Council for this historical agreement. But it's an irony that when finally we have real true European money, we are going to spend it basically in national envelopes and national programmes, not in a European-wide big programme. A crise gravissima.
The very serious crisis that the health crisis that we have experienced, we still see that there is a threat of death of those who are ill, of our health systems. But this is also an economic and social crisis that is extremely grave. And that is why it is fundamental to state that this is an historical agreement. But there is a question that is raised. How precisely are we going to implement this? National governments do not have any excuse. They have everything in their hands to respond to the crisis, to the citizens, to the workers, and to the businesses. Now, when it comes to MFF, we are disappointed, specifically disappointed because we don't have a big health program, and also because we don't have enough for research and Erasmus+. And that is why we stand in the European Parliament to make sure that this program will be conditioned on the fact that we can reintegrate these programs into the MFF. One last word when it comes to our socialist colleagues in Portugal that spoke of the conference on the future of Europe, but we have to understand that it was the Prime Minister of Portugal who was reluctant to do that in the Council. When Prime Minister Costa did not defend this when it came specifically to the rule of law and defending rule of law in the Council. Thank you.
Madam Fritzon, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Europe is faced with major challenges, and we need to solve the crisis together. We need both a modern long-term budget which prioritizes employment and the climate, and we need a recovery package which is linked to the current crisis. And, of course, we need the green transition. It's therefore a good thing that after 5 long days the heads of state and government in Europe have come up with an agreement both on a long-term budget and the recovery package. It's a historical progress. Negotiations always mean giving and taking, and we know that there are different views and different ideas in the member states, and that's also the situation here in the Parliament. They've shouldered their responsibility. We need to shoulder ours. We need a Europe which is leading on climate and which ensures that we have a proper employment in Europe and takes account of the rule of law in all member states, and not in 25 member states, not in 26 member states. In 27 member states we need to stand for the rule of law. That is how we build a strong Europe for coming generations. Why are we doing this? I'm doing it for my children, for my children's children and their future.
Thank you. And now, please, Laro, 1 minute, please.
Dear President Ursula von der Leyen, dear colleagues, we all heard what the EU leaders want. Now, it's our role in this House to discuss about what citizens want. And in particular, let us hear what the next generation wants. Because we name it, we promote it, but we do not listen to it. We see how problems such as Erasmus+, Youth Guarantee, Horizon or Digital Europe are cut or left unfunded in a survival mode in a feeble multi-annual financial budget. 90% of the next generation EU funds will finance the Recovery and Resilience Facility, the largest EU programme in history which will help us renew Europe. As a co-rapporteur on this file, I will wish to make a pledge. The Recovery and Resilience Facility will be an instrument for the next generation. I will advocate as part of the Parliament position to have within the Recovery and Resilience Facility a pillar for reforms and investment designed for the next generation, for youth and children. We will repair and prepare the Union for the future only through having the next generation on board. Not only for asking them to pay the bill, but to let them have a voice. To our youth, to our children, at EU level, the Parliament is and will be your voice. Thank you.
Grazie. Thank you. And now, Slotowski, 1 minute.
Microphone.
Microphone, please. Microphone.
Does it work now? Yes. Szanowny Panie Przewodniczący.
President, the European Council has achieved a difficult compromise on the new budget which is very important for our economy to recover after the crisis that we have gone through. And for this, I would like to congratulate all the members of the Council. I think that the role of our Prime Minister is especially commendable. There are many critical voices concerning the conclusions from the Council. I think they are a bit hypocritical and over-exaggerated. Here you talk about the mechanism for the protection of the rule of law, but this is a sort of out-of-treaty instrument to influence the internal matters of member states. But the facts are that all the new laws that are being adopted in Poland are legal, they are within the treaties, and Poland is a country which is based on the rule of law. There can be no doubt about it. However, there are many in this chamber who would like to use the rule of law instrument to put pressure on the prime ministers they don't like or governments they don't like. Poland is exemplary in terms of using EU funds according to the treaties and the Polish law, and that should be the one and only criteria to be used for the future. And the Council decided on the basis of this exactly. I do hope that the Parliament is not going to spoil those results and it will not put forward unreasonable demands. The Europeans today need cooperation more than ever. Thank you.
Mr. Peters, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, President. President of the Commission, ladies and gentlemen, over the last few days, a big step forward has been taken. The commitment of the heads of state and government for a multi-annual budget and a recovery plan means that we can now again invest in our budgets and recovery. The recovery plans 390 funds, 360 loans. The funds means that everybody can benefit, and the loans mean that everybody can use a recovery fund. But the work is not over. There's strong cuts in research and development. At the moment, we need to prioritize the search for a vaccine against COVID and cancer. And we absolutely need to continue research in these areas. Erasmus Plus and defense have also been cut. Without decent cooperation in defense, the EU cannot be independent. There is a second wave of corona hitting us now, and now we're starting negotiations between the Parliament and the other institutions, and we're short of time, but the agreement could be better, must be better.
Thank you, Madam Jungerius. 1 minute.
Thank you very much. My country didn't get the best press in Europe. We were the leaders of the Frugal Four. And it should have been a different situation. However, we're glad that we have an agreement. We can't fight this crisis alone. It's good to have unity. It shows the added value of Europe vis-à-vis the rest of the world. However, the budget that's being proposed is really a case of old wine in new skins. There are no new priorities such as youth, unemployment, health, and the climate and science. These are not priorities anymore. We've missed an opportunity that we got because of the corona crisis. And I'm not saying anything about the weak link between EU funds and the rule of law. So I would say we're underway, but we're only starting.
Prego. Thank you very much. Note, please. 1 minute.
Děkuji, pane předsedo, za slovo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me the floor. Hello. The agreement from the European Council gives us hope that we will be stronger in this situation. And the EU leaders have fulfilled their role, and they merit our thanks, our gratitude. We should mention that all EU institutions should have their role of supporting and keep the support of public. As a coordinator for REGI, I don't want to decrease the allocation for Just Transition Fund. On the contrary, I welcome the strengthening of cohesion policy, which is the policy that creates new jobs. Let me thank Madam Commissioner Ferreira, who is responsible for cohesion. Let me thank her for her wonderful work. And at the conclusion, let me say that European funds that should be used for climate measures should be open to all possible technologies, including nuclear energy. Thank you.
Grazie. Thank you, Mr. Ressler. 1.5 minutes, please. Microphone, please.
Now it works, I hope.
President, dear colleagues, at a time of a health and economic crisis, unprecedented after a dramatic spring, unusual summer and uncertain rest of the year, the political agreement of the European Council is a positive message. It's a message of responsibility and of unity, and that is what we need today in Europe. Some countries, economic sectors and some generations have been more affected than some others, and that is why it was crucial to avoid deepening social and economic differences. For my country, Croatia, but also a large part of Europe, concrete solidarity gives a huge opportunity for faster economic recovery and strengthening, together with digital and green transformation. Making differences smaller is a precondition for a Europe of a new generation. At the same time, it's clear this is only the beginning. The Europe of a new generation is possible only if we have more investment in the proven and successful programs such as in research, health, digital Europe. that is all that is future-oriented. The European Parliament, as the only elected European body, can work some more on this good proposal in the negotiations and add a strong European perspective to it and make it even better. Together we have to show that Europe is prepared for historical steps when it's needed the most for all generations and all member states. Thank you.
Plus d'argent pour la santé, le climat.
Money for health, climate, employment, that will come down to the national budgets. A digital tax is good, but it's just 2 billion. A plastic tax, excellent, but it's 5 billion, and that is going to fall. The best solution, the one that would bring the most money and that would rally the most countries, that would be a financial transaction tax. Well, it has been spoken about, but that is not enough. We need an agreement, and we need one this year. Despite Brexit, despite the crisis, a financial transaction tax could bring some 50 billion. The Barroso Commission proposed a directive. Despite Brexit, despite the crisis, well, that proposal could be 50 billion. That would be 15 billion to reimburse the common debt, the rest for climate, health and employment. That is an S&D proposal to have a more ambitious budget without a single euro coming from the national budgets. Now, we've heard that it is a priority from the rotating presidency, and I'm so pleased. I am a rapporteur on the 2021 budget, and as a citizen and as a European, I cannot accept a budget if we haven't come up with an agreement on the financial transaction tax. We need that 50 billion for climate, health and employment. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam in 't Veld. Sophie, the floor is yours.
Chair, before I start my intervention, I would like to say that I find it regrettable that the leadership of Commission and Council have a habit of leaving before the end of the debate. For such an important debate, I would expect everybody to be here until the end. So, colleagues, today is a birthday. It's the birthday of the European coal and steel community. And in the 1951 founding Treaty of Paris, it gave the high authority the power to levy taxes and to borrow money. And budget decisions were taken by a majority. Now let that sink in. The government leaders at the time had the vision and the courage to take a big leap forward for future generations. Today's debate is not about money or figures. It's about how we want to shape our European society and make it fit for the future. It's about the choice between old Europe and new Europe. Rebates are old Europe, actually 1984, when the Berlin Wall still divided Europe. Investing in research, climate policies and the rule of law, that's new Europe. Colleagues, last year over 200 million Europeans gave us a mandate. They voted with hopes and expectations for the future. Parliament has the power, and we have a duty to use it. Let's take that leap forward. Thank you.
Grazie. Thank you. I will communicate your observation to the people it was addressed to. Mr. Novakov, Andrei, 1 minute and a half.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, dear Commissioner, dear representatives of the Council. Since there weren't too much colleagues who said that, I'm going to do it. Thank you for steering the ship during that 5-day storm. You deserve at least respect for your strength and what you achieved. Разбира се, това, което постигнахте, не е съвършено.
Now, of course, what you've accomplished is not perfect. The agreement is not perfect, and that is why the European Parliament will try to perfect it. Some of the promises leave us a little bit perplexed. For example, how can we exit the crisis and at the same time reduce the health programme? How can we promise more climate and whilst at the same time reducing the resources for the Just Transition Fund? We have fought to increase resources allocated to Erasmus, but I think what we're doing here is far more valuable. The European Parliament has had to wait more than 600 days to get to this agreement. But today we are ready to do everything we can to make this improvement better, make this agreement better. Now, every evening when we say goodnight to our children, we promise that we'll say to them good morning the next day and that it will be a better day tomorrow. I think that's what we need to keep in mind during this crisis. We must not reduce cohesion policy. These are what our citizens expect from the European Parliament.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez, for 1 minute. Thank you very much, President. Well, Europe, with the Recovery Fund, has decided to grab the reins of its destiny. So common debt to build a common future. That is precisely how societies are built. Now, these reforms are going to be necessary to be able to really bet on our citizens and to invest in them to make our economy much greener, highly digital and highly competitive and much with good jobs. So, and will be much more resilient. Now, of course, we're going to need more inclusive growth. That means that we go towards convergence. Now, we must learn from our mistakes from the past. We are not going to be bailing out any country. We're going to be bailing out Europe and the values that we believe in and that give us meaning, solidarity, and working together. And with the Recovery Fund, well, the European Parliament has really contributed to that, many of the governments, including the Spanish government. But we know that the price is extremely high. Sadly, what we saw was that there was this proposal for this community budget that wasn't met fully. We're going to make sure that we have a community budget that is up to the challenge that we have, that we will share those to meet the expectations of our citizens. Thank you very much, Madam Pereira. Lydia, 1 minute and a half. Thank you very much, President. Ladies and gentlemen, the members of the Parliament, 7 months ago we woke up to a new reality. We saw with our very eyes the devastating effect of a virus that was hitherto unknown. And we saw precisely the speed at which it spread throughout the world, and only comparable to the speed at which fear spread around the world. One by one, all of the countries of our union have been hit by this, and all of them, without any exception, have had lives lost. Now, there is fear, and there's a need to stop our virus that immobilized our factories and our schools, and for months our lives were put on hold. But Europe did not stop. Once again, Europe was able to respond to the challenge, silencing populism with action. Those populists who were consistently announcing the end of Europe. Now, I particularly welcome the decision to move forward on the tax on disposable plastic, which would be one of the union's new own resources, which is a small step, but a great step for the next generations. However, not everything comes down to good news. In fact, the Council did abdicate the idea to put into place an instrument for the solvency of companies, a real emergency aid, and then there were cuts to Horizon 2020, Erasmus program, and the Just Transition Fund. Now, the very wisely chosen Next Generation EU program has lost, therefore, part of its meaning. Unfortunately, some of the governments have given some credence to Daniel Innerarity when he said that too often the future is just the dustbin of the present. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Bullman, please. 1 minute.
President, Commissioner, President of the Council, we are very worried about our international responsibilities. The recovery program says nothing about humanitarian aid, and we've cut our development projects in terms of political cooperation for development. Solidarity is likely to suffer at a time when our partners desperately need our solidarity. We've got to sort that out. We've got to improve it. The Social Democrats are working for a good extension of the current program for economic recovery and for social development. This is what we stand for in Germany and in Europe, but there's one thing that's very important, and that is that the rights of the citizens in Budapest and in Warsaw doesn't have a price. They're not for sale either today or tomorrow or on the day when we vote in this.
Thank you, Udo. Mr. Karas, please. 1.5 minutes.
President, ladies and gentlemen, the late compromise of the Council agreement is the start of negotiations with the European Parliament. These negotiations are urgent because what we're seeing here is a renationalisation, a lack of responsibility for the future, and all sorts of good intentions. We cannot accept that, but instead we have to improve the situation and the results. The European Union is not a cash point. We're not a market for haggling. We are a community based on the rule of law. We want to strengthen democracy. We want a credible, future-oriented community. This is what we owe the people and the future, and working together. It's not about party strategy, far-right populism or national populism that unfortunately is growing in our countries. We need courage, we need decency, we need responsibility, and we need to be up to the task. And the President Michel here has spoken in a very different way than the communication of the 750 billion that has been termed historic. Yes, it is historic. However, too many heads of state and government have been showing national populism and are not aware of the responsibility on their shoulders. Let me say very clearly that we as the European Parliament are not going to allow for a decision without this chamber of the people. No money if there's infringement of our values. No cuts to the detriment of our common objectives in education, research, security, the climate, investment and social cohesion. Introducing a rule of law mechanism and own resources for a binding repayment plan. We have to do away with unanimity so that European democracy can be strengthened.
Thank you. Mr. Angel, Mark, 1 minute.
Finding an agreement and a common answer to an unprecedented crisis in Europe is good news. Yes, the deal is historic, but only the part of the recovery fund, Next Generation EU, which includes a big part of grants and also communitarisation of that. This is solidarity and a better answer to the crisis than 2008. However, when it comes to the MFF, which is supposed to make Europe more resilient, more social, more modern, more climate friendlier, this is bad news for the next generation and not historic. As socialists, we cannot accept the cuts in future-oriented programmes. We cannot accept and will not accept the watering down of the rule of law. And therefore, it is good that in this resolution we added fundamental rights and democracy. I deeply regret that the rebates have not been abolished. Here, the Council missed an opportunity to move us out of the net payer discussion in Europe. Europe is more than giving and taking. Today, we as members of the European Parliament, the only directly elected institution, we write history too by voting in favour of this resolution where we will welcome the recovery fund, but we clearly state that the MFF is not enough. Not enough when it comes to the finances and not enough when it comes to defending our rule of law and democracy. This Parliament will not swallow bitter pills. Europe deserves more. Thank you very much.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you very much. Mr. Spiraki, 1.5 minutes, please. Madam Spiraki.
Thank you, Chairman. The leaders of the European Union made a historic step forward. They agreed to common borrowing in order to face the biggest crisis since the war. Now we need to have a common market and economies that will be greener and more resilient. Of course, this historical step is based on a historic compromise. But that means that we as a parliament cannot accept the decoupling of payments from the rule of law, as well as the cuts, especially the cuts in the Just Transition Fund that is sorely needed in the region of Western Macedonia and Megalopoli. Ladies and gentlemen, right now in the Mediterranean we have tension, and it is the fault of Turkey. Turkey is threatening the sovereign rights of Greece. They have issued a NAVTEX and they want to make seismic research in the Greek continental shelf. They are also threatening France. They are also breaking the arms embargo in Libya. They have turned Hagia Sophia in a mosque. We need to have right now sanctions against Turkey. This is the only way we can send a clear message that we do not submit to threats. It is now the time that the EU will have to rise to the occasion. If we keep accepting Turkey like that, it means that we cannot have European cohesion.
Thank you. The last speech is from Madam Toia. This council will go down in history without a doubt because it took the right direction for our future. We decided to choose unity for Europe. We decided to choose solidarity amongst member states. We decided to choose responsibility to move forward together with joint tools, not just the economic crisis, but health, work, bringing together the social part of Europe. We've understood now that if one country falls, then little by little or possibly all can fall. We understood also that the populace, even in my country, in Italy, where I think that they still sometimes can be strong, they have no arguments to support the battle against Europe. So very much we are so pleased with the result, but then there are some things that we are disappointed about, specifically, not just me, but others. Many have said that we need to have an MFF that isn't contradictory and that doesn't damage what we're aiming for with the recovery. I don't understand how we can cut education, culture, and I'd say that specifically to President Michel, but to the person who's listening for him. We cannot make cuts to research. The agreement that we moved towards over the course of months with researchers, with those in academia, in the healthcare, they were wondering how they were going to be able to survive, and now we know that our lives and our economy will very much depend by the result of research that is currently undergoing when it comes to pharmaceutical products as well as a vaccine. And then everyone working in the healthcare industry, researchers, they don't have enough pay. And yet they kept working heroically, carrying out their work. We cannot stop. We have to work for them. You know, President, you did much for them, and I know that we have much. We need to thank you very much for this result. On behalf of the European Parliament, we need to improve the results for the MFF. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to give the floor now to the Commission. Commissioner Hahn, for your response. The floor is yours, sir.
Sehr geehrter Herr Präsident, Herr Minister, meine Damen.
President, Minister, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank you all from the bottom of my heart that you organised this extraordinary meeting, and some of you actually interrupted your well-deserved holidays. But I think the situation required it of us, that we needed to find very rapid solutions. It took a long time for the Council to reach an agreement, but now for the negotiations we have a result. I share the criticisms that you have expressed in terms, in particular, of the shape of the MFF. Certainly, I hope then we can make some improvements during the negotiations, particularly those areas where there cannot be any compensation through Next Generation EU. For example, foreign policy. We've made major declarations, and here in this House we've discussed again and again just how important it is to be active in the neighbourhood, in Africa in particular, and originally because of tackling migration, that still applies. But now it is about ensuring that in other parts of the world, particularly in the light of medicine and vaccinations that might be produced in other parts of the world, but that's only possible with the adequate budget. So I do think there is room then for improvement in these areas. The rule of law, that's been mentioned again and again by you. Madam Piri, I think you were one of those who said that there are differing interpretations. But yes, that is that's what people do. People go back home and then tell what they want, but ultimately what counts is what's on paper and what is ultimately adopted. So there is a political declaration, but now it's about translating this into legislation, and obviously you are a part of this negotiation and this decision. On own resources, I would like to truly thank you for your strong support, but I think the path ahead is clear. It was always necessary to look at what the necessary magnitude is of what needs to be taken from the capital markets, but also what needs to then be paid back. We now have a basis, and the Commission obviously will now look much more into the details of what type of new own resources could be made available. We have our ideas, the Parliament has its ideas, and it is very important to make a solid assessment. Certain own resources could be designed and implemented more quickly. Others would need more time because of their complexity. For example, the carbon border adjustment mechanism. In legal terms and also in terms of substance, it's not an easy task. It's going to take a bit of time, but rest assured that the Commission is absolutely determined to make these hitherto unknown proposals. So once again, thank you very much. I think in the last few days, what was achieved was rightly termed by some of you historic. Of course, with all the downsides inherent in it. However, I've been involved more than 10 years ago, and I do think that at the time, with the economic and financial crisis, the EU did not react in time, and I think now it's very important to keep that in mind, and this time we are. And my last plea to you, I do completely understand the need and the prerogatives of the European Parliament to be intensely involved in the negotiations and the decisions and in the issue of how the money will be spent in the next years. But please, my plea to you, let us have a rapid negotiation. Let us take a decision as soon as possible, because time is of the essence. And we shouldn't forget that once you have taken your decisions, then we still need the member states to take decisions. 23 national parliaments will have to ratify these decisions. All the member states will have to ratify it, and it is a process that traditionally always takes months. What we will call for is that in an ideal situation this can happen as quickly as possible so that European citizens, European companies can have answers and be helped right at the start of next year, not having to wait till the middle of the year or the end of the year. And again, we have to show European solidarity. So once again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. This brings us to the conclusion of our debate in this extraordinary plenary session. The next one will be in September. We have all experienced, dear colleagues, a very special moment in our lives and in the lives of our institutions. I wanted to thank all of you, all of the political groups. I'd like to thank also the Parliament's administration. The President kindly thanks the interpreters. These have been very challenging months. We have done everything that we possibly could to make sure that the Parliament remained operational. And with the functioning of the European Parliament, we have been able to make Europe work. This has been an extraordinary result, and I do have to thank you all for the sacrifices that you have all made, for all of your patience. You have all wanted more, but we did everything that was possible with what we had available. Now, our work will proceed, and continue. The Parliament will continue in all of its activities. It will be wonderful to see us all get back in Strasbourg again, which is one of our citizens. I'd like to thank you all, one and all. Thank you.